Durango, Colorado, 1885. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Silverton as Isaac O'Malley dismounted from his chestnut mare. At 26, he cut a striking figure against the rugged backdrop of the San Juan Mountains. His lean frame, honed by years of ranch work, moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to long days in the saddle. The trail dust that clung to his denim trousers and blue cotton shirt did nothing to diminish his natural good looks. Strong jawline barely dusted with a day's worth of stubble, and eyes the color of summer sage that had earned him more than a few admiring glances. But Isaac paid little mind to such attention. The frontier had taught him a harsh lesson. Attachment was a luxury a cowboy couldn't afford. His parents' homestead had been claimed by drought 3 years prior, his mother by consumption soon after, and his father by a broken heart within months. Isaac had learned that the West took everything eventually: land, livestock, loved ones. Better to keep moving, stay unattached, and never put down roots that would inevitably be torn up. "Mighty fine horse you got there," called a gruff voice from the boardwalk. Isaac nodded at the old-timer leaning against a post outside the general store, but didn't engage further. He'd come to town for supplies and maybe a hot meal at the hotel restaurant, nothing more. Silverton was just another stop on his journey to nowhere in particular. As Isaac secured his horse at the hitching post, the distant rumble of wagon wheels drew his attention to the far end of the street. A modest caravan of 3 covered wagons rolled slowly into town, likely new settlers or perhaps a merchant family. Isaac felt a familiar twinge of pity. These folks didn't know what they were in for: the cruel winters, the unforgiving summers, the isolation that could drive even the strongest minds to madness. The West didn't welcome. It merely tolerated until it decided to destroy. "Best get your business done before that lot takes over the store," the old-timer advised, gesturing toward the approaching wagons with his chin. Isaac nodded again and strode toward the general store's entrance. He had a list of essentials: coffee, ammunition, jerky, and a new pair of gloves to replace the ones worn thin from rope burns. The sooner he restocked, the sooner he could continue his solitary journey. The store bell jingled as he pushed through the door. The familiar scents of leather, tobacco, and coffee beans greeted him as he moved toward the counter. Mr. Patterson, the proprietor, was helping another customer, a round-faced young woman with her back to the door, engaged in what appeared to be a spirited negotiation. "Miss Montgomery, I assure you the price is fair considering the distance these fabrics traveled to reach us," Patterson was saying, his tone betraying a mix of exasperation and amusement. "And I assure you, Mr. Patterson, that I paid 3 cents less per yard for the same calico in Denver last month," the woman replied, her voice clear and confident. "I understand supply and demand, sir, but highway robbery is another matter entirely." Isaac found himself pausing, list forgotten in his hand, as he observed the exchange. The woman's honey-blonde hair was pinned neatly at the nape of her neck, with a few wayward curls escaping around her ears. Her deep blue dress, though simply cut, was impeccably tailored and adorned with small pearl buttons down the back. Even from behind, there was something compelling about her presence, a certain steadiness and assurance that seemed at odds with the frontier's customary effect on new arrivals. Patterson caught Isaac's eye over the woman's shoulder and offered a long-suffering smile. "Be with you directly, sir. Just concluding some business with Miss Montgomery, who seems determined to bankrupt me with her Denver prices." The woman turned then, and Isaac found himself looking into the warmest brown eyes he'd ever encountered. Her face was full and rosy-cheeked, with a small dimple appearing in her right cheek as she smiled apologetically at him. She was perhaps 20 or 21, with a robust figure that spoke of health and vitality rather than the gaunt, weather-beaten look so common among frontier women. "I apologize for the delay, sir," she said, her voice mellowing. "I didn't mean to hold up other customers with my haggling." "No hurry," Isaac heard himself reply, the words coming unbidden. "Sounds like you're just looking for a square deal." Something flashed in her eyes, surprise perhaps at finding an ally, before she turned back to Patterson. "2 cents less per yard, Mr. Patterson, and I'll take 15 yards instead of 10. Patterson sighed dramatically but nodded. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Montgomery. Your father warned me about your head for numbers." "Father exaggerates," she replied with a modest smile, though Isaac noted the pride that straightened her shoulders. As Patterson measured out the fabric, the woman glanced back at Isaac. "New to Silverton." "Just passing through," he said, the practiced response coming automatically. "Restocking supplies." A shame, she replied, her gaze assessing him with unexpected directness. We could use more young men willing to put down roots. Father says the mining operations are expanding and the town will grow with them. Isaac shifted uncomfortably, not looking to settle. No one ever is until they find reason enough, she said with a small shrug, accepting her wrapped package from Patterson. I'm Olivia Montgomery, my family just arrived from Denver, father's the new doctor. Isaac O'Malley, he replied, tipping his hat slightly, just a cowhand. No such thing as just anything out here, mister. O'Malley, she said, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Everyone serves a purpose, I imagine. She nodded politely and moved past him toward the door, the fabric of her skirt brushing against his leg as she passed. Welcome to Silverton, however briefly you may grace us with your presence. The bell jingled as she exited, leaving behind the faint scent of lavender and something Isaac couldn't quite place, possibility perhaps. He quickly dismissed the thought and turned his attention to Patterson, rattling off his list with practiced efficiency. Yet as he collected his purchases, Isaac found his gaze drifting repeatedly toward the window, watching as Olivia Montgomery crossed the street, her package tucked securely under one arm. She moved with surprising grace for her solid build, navigating the muddy crossway with practiced ease. A young boy ran past, nearly colliding with her, and her laugh carried through the glass, bright and uninhibited. Dr. Montgomery's girl, Patterson commented, following Isaac's gaze. Arrived yesterday with her father and younger brother. Mother passed some years back, I understand. Shame about the girl, though. Isaac frowned. Shame. Pretty face, sharp mind, but Patterson made a vague gesture with his hands. Built sturdy, you might say, too hefty for most men's tastes. Overheard some miners already making wagers on how long before she's resigned to spinsterhood. Pretty enough face can't always overcome certain disadvantages. Something uncomfortable twisted in Isaac's gut. He'd heard similar talk about women before, the casual cruelty of frontier men sizing up potential wives like livestock at auction. Usually he paid it no mind, it wasn't his concern how others conducted their personal affairs. But the memory of Olivia's direct gaze and confident manner made the gossip seem particularly petty. Seems capable enough, Isaac said curtly, gathering his purchases. Town could do worse than a doctor's daughter with a head for business. Patterson's eyebrows rose slightly at the unexpected defense. Sure. No offense meant, that'll be $4.35 for your supplies. Isaac paid and left the store without further conversation. Outside, the evening was settling in, painting the mountains in purple shadow. The wagons that had entered town earlier were now parked near the small white building with a freshly painted sign. Dr. James Montgomery, physician and surgeon. As Isaac untied his horse, he spotted Olivia again, helping a gray-haired man, presumably her father, unload crates from one of the wagons. She was laughing at something he said, her face animated in a way that transformed her features from merely pretty to genuinely beautiful. The weight she carried on her frame seemed to lend her a groundedness that suited the rugged landscape, unlike the fragile, wispy women who often withered under the harsh demands of frontier life. Isaac shook his head, dismissing the observation. It wasn't his business. Nothing in Silverton was. By this time tomorrow, he'd be miles away, continuing his solitary journey through a land that took everything you loved eventually. But as he mounted his horse and turned toward the boarding house where he planned to spend the night, Isaac found himself wondering what Dr. Montgomery and his daughter might be running from, or toward, in this remote mountain town. Everyone on the frontier had a story, a reason for abandoning civilization for the brutal beauty of the West. Some were running from the law, others from grief, still others from the suffocating propriety of Eastern society. And some, the most foolish of all in Isaac's estimation, were chasing dreams of a better life, dreams the West would surely shatter, just as it had shattered his. The light was fading from the sky as Isaac made his way to the modest boarding house at the edge of town. Mrs. Hollister, a widow who'd converted her home after her husband was killed in a mining accident, greeted him with practiced hospitality. "Room's small but clean," she said, leading him up a narrow staircase. "Supper's at 6 sharp, wash basins at the end of the hall, no smoking, no drinking, no women." "Yes, ma'am," Isaac replied with the deference he'd learned earned the best treatment in such establishments. "You looking for work?" she asked, pausing at the door to his room. "Jenkins over at the Silver Bell mine is always hiring, pays decent if you don't mind going underground." "Just passing through," Isaac said, the familiar words feeling oddly hollow. Heading north tomorrow. Mrs. Hollister's weathered face remained impassive. Suit yourself, plenty pass through, few stay. She handed him a small iron key. Breakfast at dawn. Don't be late or you'll miss it. Left alone in the sparse room with its narrow bed and single window overlooking the darkening street, Isaac sat on the edge of the mattress and pulled off his boots. The day's ride had been long, and tomorrow's would be longer still. North toward nowhere in particular, away from Silverton and its new doctor and his daughter with the warm eyes and confident smile. As he washed the trail dust from his face and hands, Isaac told himself it was for the best. Silverton was just another stop on an endless road. The West had taught him that nothing lasted, not hope, not home, not happiness. Better to keep moving than to risk putting down roots that would inevitably be torn away. But as he made his way downstairs for the promised supper, he couldn't quite shake the image of Olivia Montgomery standing in the fading light, her golden hair catching the last rays of sun, looking for all the world like someone who believed the frontier could be tamed by sheer force of will. Such belief was dangerous. Isaac knew better, yet something about her conviction had stirred an ember of something long dormant within him, something he'd thought the West had extinguished completely. Curiosity, perhaps, or worse, hope. Supper at Mrs. Hollister's boarding house was a quiet affair. 3 other travelers shared the table with Isaac, a drummer selling patent medicines, a land surveyor working for the railroad, and an elderly gentleman who remained silent throughout the meal. Mrs. Hollister served a hearty stew with fresh bread, moving efficiently between the kitchen and dining room with the practiced ease of a woman accustomed to feeding strangers. Isaac ate mechanically, his mind still caught on the encounter at the general store. He'd meant to retire immediately after the meal to get an early start in the morning, but the drummer's conversation drew him in despite himself. "Here there's a new doctor in town," the man was saying between mouthfuls. "Arrived today from Denver, supposed to be quite accomplished." "We need one," Mrs. Hollister replied, refilling coffee cups. "Old Doc Wilson's hands shake so bad he can hardly hold a stethoscope, let alone perform surgery. Last winter we lost 3 men to simple infections he couldn't properly treat." "I met his daughter at Patterson's store," Isaac found himself saying, "Miss Montgomery." Mrs. Hollister's eyebrows rose slightly. "Did you now?" "I heard she's educated, finished at some ladies' seminary back east. Unusual for these parts." "Unusual anywhere," the surveyor commented, "though I understand she keeps the doctor's books." "Good head for figures, they say." "Pretty enough face from what I glimpsed when they arrived," the drummer added, though rather substantial in build. "Shame, really. Difficult prospects for marriage out here for a girl carrying extra weight, educated or not." Isaac's hand tightened around his coffee cup. "Seems like a woman with education and practical skills would be an asset to any household, regardless of her appearance." 3 pairs of eyes turned to him in surprise. The drummer recovered first, offering a knowing smile. Of course, of course. "But you know how it is out here. Men want wives who can work from sunup to sundown, bear healthy children, and not break the axles of the wagon. Natural selection, you might say." "Cruel way of putting it," Mrs. Hollister muttered, though without real conviction. The conversation shifted to other topics. The price of silver, the likelihood of the railroad reaching Silverton within the year, the persistent rumors of Indian unrest to the north. Isaac contributed little, finishing his meal in silence before excusing himself to the small porch at the rear of the house. The night air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the stars impossibly bright in the clear mountain sky. Isaac lit a cigarette, watching the smoke drift upward as he contemplated his departure the next morning. There was a ranch outside Wyoming territory that sometimes hired experienced hands for the winter. The work would be hard, the pay modest, but it would keep him fed and housed through the cold months. Just another temporary stop, just another place not to call home. The sound of laughter drew his attention to the street beyond the fence. A small group was making its way toward the boarding house, 3 men and a woman, their silhouettes distinct in the moonlight. As they drew closer, Isaac recognized Olivia Montgomery's distinctive figure, accompanied by what appeared to be miners or perhaps railroad men. "You must join us for the social next Saturday, Miss Montgomery," one of the men was saying, his voice carrying in the quiet night. "The whole town turns out, even a few of the respectable ladies play instruments." "I'd be delighted," Olivia replied, her voice warm. "Though I warn you, my musical talents are limited to enthusiastic appreciation rather than performance." "Your presence alone would be performance enough," another man said, his tone edged with something that made Isaac frown. Not much beauty in these parts to admire. Mr. Collins, you flatter excessively, Olivia responded, her tone cooling slightly. I'm sure Silverton's ladies are lovely and accomplished. Few and far between, Miss Montgomery, the first man said, and none with your particular charms. There was a pause, and even from a distance, Isaac could sense the shift in atmosphere. The men's laughter held a note that suggested their compliments weren't entirely sincere. Well, gentlemen, here's my father's new practice, Olivia said, her voice now briskly formal. Thank you for the escort and the information about the town. Good evening. So soon, the man called Collins protested. The night is young, and surely your father wouldn't object to you enjoying some conversation on the porch. My father expects me, she said firmly. He's still organizing his medical supplies. Good night, gentlemen. The three men lingered, exchanging glances Isaac could read even in the dim light. The predatory assessment of men who viewed a woman alone as fair game, regardless of her wishes. Before he could consider the wisdom of his actions, Isaac crushed out his cigarette and stepped from the shadows of the porch. Evening, Miss Montgomery, he called, striding toward the fence as if he'd been waiting specifically for her. Your father mentioned you might be passing this way, asked if I'd walk you back when you were ready. All four figures turned toward him, surprise evident in their postures. Olivia recovered quickly, her expression shifting from wariness to relief. Mr. O'Malley, she said smoothly, how thoughtful of father. Gentlemen, thank you again for your company, but it seems my escort has arrived. The miners exchanged glances, clearly reassessing the situation. Collins, a burly man with a thick mustache, stepped forward slightly. Don't believe we've met, friend, you new to these parts. Just arrived, Isaac replied evenly, opening the gate and moving to stand beside Olivia. At close range, he could see the tension in her posture despite her composed expression. Miss Montgomery, your father mentioned something about those medical texts needing to be shelved tonight. Yes, indeed, she said, playing along seamlessly, quite urgent. Gentlemen, I wish you a pleasant evening. The miners hesitated, clearly reluctant to leave but unwilling to challenge Isaac directly. Finally, Collins shrugged. Another time then, Miss Montgomery. The social on Saturday, we'll look forward to seeing you there. When the men had moved off, disappearing down the darkened street toward the saloon, Olivia released a slow breath. That was unexpected but appreciated, Mr. O'Malley. Though I believe I could have managed. No doubt, Isaac replied, suddenly aware of how presumptuous his intervention might seem. Didn't mean to imply otherwise. She studied him in the moonlight, her expression thoughtful. Yet you intervened anyway, interesting for a man just passing through. There was a subtle emphasis on his earlier words that made Isaac shift uncomfortably. Old habits, he said with a shrug. My mother raised me to offer assistance when it might be needed, whether I'm staying or going. A commendable upbringing. Olivia glanced toward the doctor's office, where a lamp still burned in the window. Father is indeed organizing supplies, though he never sent for an escort. Your improvisation was impressive. Wasn't much of a stretch, those men weren't being subtle about their intentions. No, she agreed, a flash of something hurt, perhaps, or resignation, crossing her features before she composed herself. Men rarely are subtle in their assessment of my physical attributes, or their assumptions about what those attributes might suggest about my character or availability. The blunt acknowledgement caught Isaac off guard. Women in his experience typically pretended not to notice such appraisals, maintaining the fiction that men's cruder instincts remained invisible to proper ladies. Their loss, he found himself saying. Any man worth his salt looks deeper than appearance. Olivia's smile was small but genuine. A lovely sentiment, Mr. O'Malley, somewhat at odds with my experience thus far, but lovely nonetheless. She gestured toward the doctor's office. Since you've appointed yourself my escort, would you mind actually seeing me to the door, for appearance's sake if nothing else? Those gentlemen may still be watching from a distance. Isaac nodded, falling into step beside her. They walked in companionable silence for a moment before Olivia spoke again. So, north tomorrow, you said at Patterson's, any particular destination? Nothing specific, Isaac admitted. There's ranch work in Wyoming that should last through winter. A wanderer by nature, then. Isaac considered the question more carefully than he might have normally, by circumstance perhaps. The West doesn't encourage putting down roots. Strange, Olivia mused. I've always found it does exactly that. All this space, this possibility. It seems designed for creating something permanent. Until drought or disease or winter takes it all away. She glanced at him sharply. You've lost something to the frontier. It wasn't a question, and Isaac didn't treat it as one. Everyone out here has. And yet here we all are, she said quietly, still trying, still building. There's something admirable in that persistence, don't you think? They had reached the small building that housed Dr. Montgomery's new practice, a modest structure with freshly painted trim and a sign that looked newly hung. Light spilled from the windows, along with the sound of crates being moved. Father will be at this until midnight if I don't intervene, Olivia said with fond exasperation. He believes medical texts have only one correct organizational system, and it changes weekly. You should get inside then, Isaac said, suddenly aware that he'd walked her home like a suitor might, despite having no business doing so. Olivia hesitated, studying his face in the lamplight that spilled from the windows. The social the men mentioned, it's a regular event, every other Saturday at the town hall. Nothing elaborate by Eastern standards, but it provides some civilized interaction. She paused, then added with a slight challenge in her tone, should you find yourself still in Silverton this weekend, contrary to your stated intentions. Before Isaac could formulate a response, the door opened, revealing a distinguished man in his 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and the same warm brown eyes as his daughter. Olivia, there you are, I was beginning to worry. His gaze shifted to Isaac, assessing but not unfriendly. And who might this be? Father, this is Mr. Isaac O'Malley. He kindly escorted me home when some of the local gentlemen became overly attentive in their welcome. Olivia's tone was light, but her father's expression darkened slightly. I see. Well, Mr. O'Malley, you have my gratitude. He extended his hand. Dr. James Montgomery. Sir, Isaac acknowledged, shaking the offered hand. No trouble, just happened to be at the right place. Fortuitous timing, then. Dr. Montgomery's shrewd gaze took in Isaac's trail-worn clothing and sun-weathered complexion. Are you settled in Silverton, Mr. O'Malley? Just passing through, Isaac replied automatically, though the words felt increasingly hollow each time he repeated them. Father, Mr. O'Malley is headed north tomorrow, Olivia added, something like challenge in her eyes as she looked at Isaac. Wyoming, perhaps. A pity, Dr. Montgomery said, and Isaac had the distinct impression he was being evaluated for more than casual conversation. Silverton could use more young men of good character. The mining operations attract a certain element that's less than ideal for building a proper community. I'm just a cowhand, sir, Isaac said, uncomfortable with the implied compliment. Not much use to a mining town. On the contrary, the doctor replied, diverse skills create resilient communities, but I won't keep you from your travels. He stepped back, making space for his daughter to enter. Thank you again for seeing Olivia safely home. Olivia lingered a moment longer. Safe travels, Mr. O'Malley. Should your plans change, our door is always open to new friends in Silverton. There was something in her voice, a warmth, an invitation perhaps, that caught at something deep in Isaac's chest. Thank you, Miss Montgomery, Doctor. Isaac tipped his hat and turned away, aware of them watching as he walked back toward the boarding house. The night air seemed colder somehow, the stars more distant. For the first time in years, the prospect of another solitary journey northward felt less like freedom and more like an empty ritual, motion without purpose, distance without destination. The West had taught Isaac that nothing lasted. Attachment was weakness, roots were vulnerabilities waiting to be exploited by drought or disease or human cruelty. Yet as he made his way back to his rented room, he found himself wondering what it might be like to stay in one place long enough to attend a town social. To see how the light of a dance hall lamp might play across Olivia Montgomery's honey-gold hair. To discover if her laugh sounded different in a crowded room than it did in the open street. Dangerous thoughts for a man who knew better than to hope for permanence on the frontier. Wyoming waited to the north. Another temporary job, another season of survival. Isaac told himself it was the only sensible path forward. The West had no place for dreamers or fools who believed in happy endings. He'd learned that lesson at too high a cost to forget it now. But as he lay in the narrow boarding house bed that night, sleep eluded him, his mind filled instead with warm brown eyes and a challenge that lingered in the air like an unfinished melody. Should you find yourself still in Silverton this weekend? Morning would bring clarity, Isaac decided as he finally drifted toward sleep. With dawn would come the familiar certainty that moving on was the only safe choice in an unforgiving land. The West had taught him that much, at least. The day dawned clear and crisp, the kind of autumn morning that showcased the mountains in all their rugged glory. Isaac rose before the sun, packing his meager belongings with the efficiency of a man accustomed to leaving places behind. By the time Mrs. Hollister rang the bell for breakfast, he was fully dressed and ready to depart as soon as the meal concluded. "Leaving so soon?" Mrs. Hollister asked as she served plates of eggs and bacon to her lodgers. "Weather report says there's a storm building to the north. Might be wiser to wait a day or two." "Been through worse," Isaac replied, though he glanced out the window with a slight frown. The sky looked clear enough, but he'd learned to respect the wisdom of locals who could read the mountain's moods. How bad a storm? "Early for snow, but not unheard of," the surveyor commented, reaching for the coffee pot. "Mountains make their own weather. I've seen blizzards in September that buried men alive." Mrs. Hollister nodded grimly. "Lost my sister's husband that way, thought he could outride the clouds. They found him and his horse in the spring thaw, frozen solid just 5 miles from shelter." Isaac hesitated. He'd planned to cover significant ground today, but dying in an early blizzard wasn't part of his intended journey. Still, the thought of remaining in Silverton another day or two unsettled him for reasons he wasn't ready to examine too closely. "I'll check at the livery," he decided, finishing his breakfast. "See what they say about the conditions." The livery stable was already busy when Isaac arrived, miners and freighters preparing for the day's work. The owner, a barrel-chested man named Hank Simmons, was adjusting a harness when Isaac approached. "Heading out today?" Simmons asked, recognizing Isaac from the previous evening when he'd stabled his mare. "That's the plan." "Heard there might be weather coming, though." Simmons squinted at the northern sky. "Barometers dropping fast, my bad knees aching something fierce, which never bodes well. If I were you, I'd give it at least a day, maybe two. Once those clouds roll over the peaks, you've got about an hour before all hell breaks loose." Isaac suppressed a sigh. "Appreciate the warning." "Your mare could use the rest anyway," Simmons added. "Notice she's favoring her left front hoof a bit. Nothing serious, but she'd benefit from a day in the stall with a poultice." That settled it. Isaac wouldn't risk his horse's well-being for the sake of his own restlessness. "I'll leave her with you another night then. What do I owe you?" As they discussed terms for the extended boarding, the stable doors swung open to admit a familiar figure. Olivia Montgomery entered, dressed in a practical green skirt and white shirtwaist, her golden hair neatly pinned beneath a simple hat. She carried a basket over one arm and moved with purpose toward the back of the stable. "Morning, Miss Montgomery," Simmons called, interrupting his conversation with Isaac. "Come for your brother's pony." "Good morning, Mr. Simmons." "Yes, Thomas is quite anxious to ensure his penny has settled in comfortably." Her gaze fell on Isaac, and surprise flickered across her features before she composed herself. "Mr. O'Malley. I thought you'd be well on your way to Wyoming by now." "Change of plans," Isaac replied, oddly conscious of his trail-worn appearance. "Weather to the north doesn't look promising." "How fortunate for Silverton," she said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Another day to benefit from your presence." Something in her tone, a gentle teasing perhaps, made Isaac more aware of Simmons's curious gaze shifting between them. "Just being cautious," Isaac said, more gruffly than he intended. "No sense risking a storm for the sake of a schedule." "Very sensible," Olivia agreed. "Father always says prudence is the better part of valor when it comes to mountain weather." She moved past them toward a stall containing a dappled gray pony. "Penny seems well settled, Mr. Simmons. My brother will be delighted." "She's a sweet-tempered little thing," Simmons confirmed. "Your brother chose well." Olivia ran a gentle hand over the pony's nose. "Thomas has a gift for recognizing good character in both animals and people." Her gaze flickered toward Isaac briefly. "A quality I'm trying to cultivate myself." The conversation was interrupted by a young boy's excited entrance. No more than 12, with the same honey-gold hair as his sister but his father's leaner build, Thomas Montgomery burst into the stable with the boundless energy of youth. "Livy, is Penny all right? Did she eat her breakfast?" "Can I ride her today?" The questions tumbled out as he rushed to the stall, barely noticing the adults. "Slow down, Thomas," Olivia chided gently. "Penny is perfectly fine, as you can see." But riding may need to wait a day or two. There's weather coming. The boy's face fell momentarily before brightening again. Then I can help Father organize his surgery supplies instead. He promised to show me how to use the new stethoscope. A budding physician, Simmons commented with approval, following in your father's footsteps, young man. Yes, sir, Thomas replied proudly. Father says I have steady hands and a curious mind, both essential for medicine. Thomas, this is Mr. O'Malley, Olivia introduced, gesturing toward Isaac. He's visiting Silverton briefly. The boy assessed Isaac with intelligent eyes. Are you a miner, sir, or with the railroad? Neither, Isaac replied, finding himself smiling at the boy's directness. Just a cowhand passing through. With excellent timing, Olivia added. Mr. O'Malley kindly escorted me home last evening when some of the local gentlemen became overly enthusiastic in their welcome. Thomas frowned. Were they being mean because you're, he hesitated, seeming to search for a polite term. Because I'm new to town, Olivia supplied smoothly, though Isaac suspected that wasn't what the boy had been about to say. Perhaps, in any case, Mr. O'Malley's arrival was most fortunate. Thomas turned appreciative eyes to Isaac. Thank you for helping my sister, sir. Father says a gentleman always protects ladies, even when other men forget to be gentlemen themselves. Your father sounds like a wise man, Isaac said, oddly touched by the boy's earnest gratitude. The wisest, Thomas agreed loyally. Livy, can Mr. O'Malley come to dinner? Father said we should invite new friends to make Silverton feel like home faster. Olivia's cheeks colored slightly, but she maintained her composure. Thomas, Mr. O'Malley likely has other plans, and it's impolite to put people on the spot with unexpected invitations. Actually, Isaac heard himself say, I don't have any particular plans. The boarding house serves dinner at 6, but... Then you must join us instead, Thomas insisted, looking to his sister for confirmation. Right, Livy, Father won't mind, will he? Caught between her brother's enthusiasm and Isaac's unexpected willingness, Olivia hesitated only briefly. We would be delighted to have you, Mr. O'Malley, if you truly have no other obligations. Father enjoys conversation with new acquaintances, and our housekeeper, Mrs. Wilkins, always prepares more food than 3 people could possibly consume. Isaac knew he should decline. Sharing a meal with the Montgomery family would only complicate his departure, creating connections where none should exist for a man determined to keep moving. Yet the prospect of another solitary evening at Mrs. Hollister's austere table suddenly seemed unbearably bleak. I'd be honored, he said, the words emerging before prudence could intervene. What time would be appropriate? 6 o'clock, Olivia replied, her eyes reflecting surprise at his acceptance. We're still in temporary quarters behind Father's practice until our house is ready, but Mrs. Wilkins has managed to create a comfortable dining space nonetheless. 6 it is, then. Isaac tipped his hat, suddenly eager to extricate himself before he could reconsider. If you'll excuse me, I should see about extending my room at the boarding house. As he turned to leave, Thomas called after him, Bring stories about cowboys, please, Mr. O'Malley. I've never met a real one before. Isaac glanced back to find both Montgomerys watching him, Thomas with undisguised excitement, Olivia with an expression more difficult to decipher. Interest, perhaps, or curiosity. Something that made Isaac's customary guardedness feel suddenly inadequate. I'll see what I can remember, he promised the boy, though his eyes remained on Olivia's face a moment longer than necessary. Outside the livery, Isaac paused to collect himself. What had possessed him to accept a dinner invitation? He was leaving Silverton as soon as the weather cleared, tomorrow or the next day at the latest. Getting acquainted with the town's new doctor and his family served no purpose except to make departure more complicated. Yet as he made his way back to Mrs. Hollister's to secure his room for another night, Isaac found himself wondering what colored dress Olivia might wear to dinner, and whether the lamplight in their quarters would turn her honey-gold hair to spun amber as it had last night outside the doctor's office. Dangerous thoughts for a man determined to keep moving, dangerous and pointless. But as the first clouds began to gather over the northern peaks, Isaac discovered he wasn't thinking about Wyoming at all. By mid-afternoon, Simmons's weather prediction was proving accurate. Dark clouds had swallowed the mountain peaks to the north, and a bitter wind swept down the main street, sending townsfolk hurrying to secure loose items and bringing the day's outdoor activities to an early close. Isaac spent the hours restlessly, first cleaning his gear, then wandering the town's modest business district, finally settling in the hotel's small reading room with a week-old newspaper. As 5 o'clock approached, he returned to the boarding house to wash and change into his one decent shirt, a blue cotton garment with only minimal wear at the collar and cuffs. He brushed his dark hair and trimmed his stubble as best he could with a pocket knife and the small mirror above the washstand. The man who looked back at him seemed like a stranger, more like the Isaac O'Malley who had existed before drought and death had stripped away everything but survival. Mrs. Hollister raised her eyebrows when he came downstairs, but made no comment beyond informing him that dinner would be held for his return. Outside, the wind had intensified, carrying the first hints of moisture. Isaac pulled his coat tighter and set off toward the doctor's office, a small package tucked inside his jacket, a modest tin of boiled sweets he'd purchased at Patterson's store as a gift for Thomas. The doctor's quarters behind the medical practice proved to be a surprisingly cozy arrangement of rooms. Mrs. Wilkins, a capable-looking woman in her 50s, answered his knock and ushered him into a small parlor furnished with what appeared to be a careful selection of quality pieces that had survived the journey from Denver. "Miss Montgomery will be down directly," she informed him. "The doctor is just finishing with a patient, mining accident, nothing too serious. Master Thomas is helping." She eyed Isaac's damp coat. "Storm's coming in faster than expected. We'll have snow before midnight, mark my words." "So I've heard," Isaac replied, surrendering his coat and hat. "Fortunate I delayed my departure." "Providence looks after fools and travelers, Mrs." Wilkins said with the confidence of someone quoting a long-held truth. "Often they're one and the same. Please make yourself comfortable. There's sherry on the sideboard if you're inclined." Left alone, Isaac took in the room's details. A well-used medical text lay open on a side table. A woman's embroidery hoop rested on a chair by the window, the half-completed pattern showing a mountain landscape. A child's illustrated book about anatomy sat atop a small desk, alongside a slate covered with careful mathematical calculations. The door opened, and Olivia entered, wearing a dress of deep burgundy that complemented her fair complexion and brought warmth to her brown eyes. Her hair was arranged more elaborately than he'd seen previously, with small pearl combs securing the honey-gold strands. "Mr. O'Malley," she greeted him, her smile genuine. "Thank you for braving the weather to join us." "Miss Montgomery." Isaac found himself momentarily at a loss for words, struck by the transformation from the practical young woman he'd encountered at the livery to this polished dinner hostess. "The weather is still mild compared to what's coming, I'm told." "Indeed, Father says we'll likely have our first snow tonight." She gestured toward the sideboard. "May I offer you some sherry, or perhaps you'd prefer whiskey?" "Father keeps a small supply for medicinal purposes, of course." "Sherry would be fine, thank you." Isaac watched as she poured 2 small glasses with practiced ease. "Your home is very comfortable." "We've done our best with limited space," Olivia replied, handing him a glass. "Our proper house won't be ready until spring, but Mrs. Wilkins has worked miracles with what we have." She took a seat, arranging her skirts with unconscious grace. "I hope Thomas didn't put you on the spot with his invitation." "He's at an age where social niceties sometimes escape him." "Not at all," Isaac assured her. "It was kind of him to think of including a stranger." "Thomas has never met a stranger, only friends he hasn't properly interviewed yet," Olivia said with fond exasperation. "He's convinced everyone has fascinating stories if only he asks enough questions." "And you," Isaac found himself asking, "do you share his belief in universal fascination?" Olivia's eyes met his over the rim of her glass. "I believe everyone has depths worth exploring, though not everyone wishes those depths to be discovered." Something in her gaze suggested she placed him in the latter category. "Some prefer to present only their surfaces to the world." Before Isaac could respond to this surprisingly astute observation, the door opened again to admit Dr. Montgomery and Thomas, both looking pleased with themselves. "Mr. O'Malley, welcome," the doctor said, crossing to shake Isaac's hand. "I apologize for the delay. Mr. Jenkins caught his hand in some mining equipment, required several stitches, but he'll keep all his fingers, thankfully." "I helped, Mr. O'Malley," Thomas announced proudly. "I held the tray with the instruments and handed Father exactly what he needed when he needed it." "Most impressive," Isaac replied seriously. "That requires concentration and steady hands." "That's what Father says. I didn't faint or anything, even though there was quite a lot of blood." Thomas, Olivia interjected, perhaps Mr. O'Malley would prefer less graphic dinner conversation. On the contrary, Isaac said, finding the boys' enthusiasm refreshing. I've seen my share of injuries on the range. It takes a special kind of courage to help rather than turn away. Thomas beamed at this validation, and even Dr. Montgomery looked pleased at Isaac's understanding. Indeed it does, the doctor agreed, and speaking of dinner, I believe Mrs. Wilkins has been giving us meaningful glances through the doorway for the past few minutes. Shall we proceed to the table before she decides to serve the soup in the parlor? The dining room was small but well appointed, with a polished oak table that could seat 6 comfortably. Fine china and silver suggested the Montgomerys had brought the best of their Denver life with them to the frontier. Mrs. Wilkins served a meal that far exceeded Isaac's expectations: vegetable soup followed by roast beef with potatoes, fresh bread, and a variety of preserves that Olivia proudly identified as her own work. Livy makes the best preserves in Colorado, Thomas informed Isaac seriously. She won ribbons at the Denver Fair 3 years running. Thomas, Olivia protested, color rising in her cheeks. Mr. O'Malley doesn't need to hear about county fair ribbons. On the contrary, Isaac said, spreading a portion of raspberry preserves on a slice of bread. Accomplishments deserve recognition, especially practical ones. He tasted the preserves and found them exceptional, perfectly balanced between sweet and tart. These are remarkable, Miss Montgomery. Thank you, she replied, clearly pleased despite her modesty. I find satisfaction in transforming simple ingredients into something that brings comfort through the winter months. There's something almost magical about capturing summer's essence to sustain us through the cold. Isaac was struck by the poetry in her practical observation. I've never thought of it that way, but you're right. My mother used to say similar things about her garden, that she was storing sunshine in her root cellar. Your mother sounds like a wise woman, Dr. Montgomery commented. Is your family settled nearby? The question, though innocent, struck at Isaac's carefully maintained defenses. They're gone, he said simply. Drought took the homestead 3 years ago. Illness took my mother soon after. My father didn't survive the winter. A hush fell over the table. Thomas looked stricken, while Dr. Montgomery's expression shifted to professional compassion. But it was Olivia's face that caught Isaac's attention, not pity, but a deep understanding that suggested she was no stranger to loss. I'm sorry, Dr. Montgomery said quietly. The frontier takes its toll on the best of families. Mother died when I was 8, Thomas offered suddenly. Scarlet fever. Father couldn't save her, even though he's the best doctor in Colorado. Thomas, Olivia murmured, but her brother continued. It's all right to talk about sad things sometimes, Livy. You said so yourself. He turned earnest eyes to Isaac. Father says memories keep people alive in our hearts even when they're gone from the world. Your father is right, Isaac said, oddly touched by the boy's straightforward approach to grief. And very wise. It's a wisdom born of necessity in this land, Dr. Montgomery said, his gaze distant. We all carry those we've lost. The trick is learning to carry them gently, as companions rather than burdens. The conversation shifted to lighter topics, Thomas's education, which Olivia supplemented between the local school's limited offerings. The doctor's hopes for establishing proper medical care in a region woefully underserved, the upcoming town social, which, Olivia explained, served as both entertainment and community building. You must attend, Mr. O'Malley, Thomas insisted. There's music and dancing, and Mrs. Fletcher makes the best apple cider in the territory. I'm afraid Mr. O'Malley will likely be on his way north by Saturday, Olivia reminded her brother gently. The storm shouldn't last more than a day or two, from what Mr. Simmons predicts. Isaac found himself unexpectedly reluctant to confirm this obvious truth. Weather can be unpredictable in the mountains, he hedged. No sense making firm plans until the sky's clear. Something flickered in Olivia's eyes, surprise perhaps, or cautious pleasure. Very sensible, she agreed. The West rewards flexibility, not rigid schedules. As Mrs. Wilkins cleared the dinner plates and brought out an apple tart for dessert, Isaac realized he was more relaxed than he'd been in years. The Montgomery home, temporary though it was, emanated a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove's heat and everything to do with the family itself. Dr. Montgomery proved to be well-read and thoughtful, offering observations on everything from territorial politics to advances in medical science without ever seeming pretentious. Thomas's curious mind and open heart provided a refreshing counterpoint to adult conversation. And Olivia, Isaac found his attention returning to her repeatedly throughout the meal, drawn by her quiet intelligence, her gentle humor, and the genuine care she showed for both her father and brother. Here was a family that had known loss yet hadn't surrendered to it, hadn't let grief or the frontier's harshness define them or limit their capacity for building a life worth living. It was both inspiring and unsettling to a man who'd spent years believing the only sensible response to the West's brutality was emotional withdrawal and perpetual motion. After dinner, Thomas convinced Isaac to examine his collection of illustrated books about natural history, pointing out favorite passages with the enthusiasm only a 12-year-old boy can muster for interesting facts. Dr. Montgomery was called away to check on another patient, leaving Olivia and Isaac to converse over coffee in the small parlor. "Thomas has taken quite a shine to you," Olivia observed as they listened to the wind's increasing ferocity outside. "He doesn't often find adults willing to take his interests seriously." "He's a remarkable boy," Isaac replied honestly. "You've done well with him." Olivia's smile held a touch of sadness. "We've done our best. After Mother died, I was determined he would have as normal a childhood as possible, despite the circumstances." "You couldn't have been more than a child yourself." 13, she confirmed. "Old enough to understand what was needed, young enough to adapt to new responsibilities. Father was devastated for a time. His work sustained him, but the day-to-day matters of raising a young boy fell largely to me until he found his footing again." Isaac studied her face in the lamplight. "That's a heavy burden for young shoulders." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but not an uncommon one on the frontier. Most women here bear responsibilities that would shock Eastern sensibilities. The West doesn't afford us the luxury of extended childhood or sheltered femininity." "No," Isaac agreed, thinking of the women he'd known on ranches and homesteads, mothers and daughters who worked from dawn until dusk, who could birth calves, repair fences, and shoot straight while still maintaining some semblance of the domestic arts. But it often fails to recognize their strength properly. Olivia regarded him with interest. "That's an unusual perspective from a man of the West, Mr. O'Malley. Most take women's fortitude for granted while simultaneously insisting on their frailty when convenient." "My mother taught me better," Isaac said simply. "She kept our homestead functioning through drought and hardship while never losing her fundamental kindness. The strongest person I've ever known." "You must miss her deeply." "Every day." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the increasing patter of sleet against the windows and Thomas's voice from the next room, reading aloud a particularly fascinating passage about bison migration patterns to Mrs. Wilkins, who was pretending great interest while mending linens. "May I ask a personal question, Mr. O'Malley?" Olivia said eventually, her tone thoughtful. "You can ask," Isaac replied, suddenly wary. "I might not answer." Her lips quirked in a small smile. "Fair enough, I was wondering, what are you running from, or perhaps more accurately, what are you avoiding by never staying in one place long enough to form attachments?" The directness of the question and its uncomfortable accuracy sent a jolt through Isaac. "That's remarkably presumptuous for such brief acquaintance, Miss Montgomery." "Perhaps," she conceded without apology, "but I've observed that people who move constantly through the West fall into two categories. Those running towards something and those running away. The former have a brightness about them, an anticipation. The latter carry shadows they believe distance might dispel." Her eyes met his directly. "You strike me as belonging to the second group." Isaac considered deflecting or simply declining to answer, but something about her genuine interest, free from judgment or pity, loosened his customary reserve. "When you lose everything," he said quietly, "you learn that attachment itself is the danger. The West takes what you love eventually. Moving keeps that truth at arm's length." "And yet," Olivia countered gently, "remaining in motion means never building anything that might withstand the West's harshness. Never discovering if something could endure. Some lessons come at too high a cost to risk learning them twice." Olivia's expression softened. "I understand that feeling all too well. When Mother died, I was certain I'd never survive loving anyone so deeply again. The risk seemed unbearable." She glanced toward the room where Thomas's voice still droned on about bison. "But I discovered something surprising about the heart, Mr. O'Malley. It doesn't actually become safer when kept empty." It simply grows smaller and harder until it can barely sustain its owner, let alone offer warmth to others. The insight struck uncomfortably close to Isaac's experience of the past 3 years, the gradual numbing, the diminishing capacity for genuine pleasure or connection. He'd called it adaptation, Olivia named it diminishment. Before he could formulate a response, the front door opened, admitting Dr. Montgomery and a blast of frigid air. "It's full winter out there already," the doctor announced, stamping snow from his boots. "Mr. O'Malley, I'd advise against attempting to return to the boarding house tonight. The temperature has dropped precipitously, and the snow is falling in earnest." Isaac rose immediately. "I appreciate the warning, but I shouldn't impose." "Nonsense," Dr. Montgomery interrupted. "We have a perfectly serviceable sofa in my study, and Mrs. Wilkins always keeps extra blankets on hand. It would be irresponsible of me as a physician to allow anyone to risk exposure in these conditions." Thomas appeared in the doorway, his expression brightening at this development. "You're staying, Mr. O'Malley? Wonderful. We can continue our conversation about cattle drives in the morning." Caught between the doctor's concern, Thomas's enthusiasm, and his own reluctance to face the worsening storm, Isaac found himself without a graceful way to decline. His gaze met Olivia's, finding no discomfort there at the prospect of his extended presence, only a quiet understanding and perhaps a hint of satisfaction, as if his unplanned stay somehow confirmed an observation she'd already made. "If you're certain it's no imposition," Isaac relented. "None whatsoever," Dr. Montgomery assured him. "In fact, you'd be doing us a service. Having someone capable on hand is always useful during the first substantial storm of the season. There's often trouble with the miners' lodgings or emergency situations requiring extra hands." And so it was settled. Mrs. Wilkins efficiently prepared the study's sofa with sheets and blankets, while Thomas extracted promises from Isaac to share more stories in the morning. Dr. Montgomery offered a nightshirt and basic toiletries, treating the arrangement as the most natural thing in the world. As the household prepared for bed, Olivia paused at the study door where Isaac was arranging his borrowed accommodations. "Sleep well, Mr. O'Malley," she said softly. "The storm may seem threatening, but there's something to be said for weathering it in good company rather than alone." Her words carried a weight beyond their surface meaning, an invitation, perhaps, to consider that some risks might be worth taking, some patterns worth breaking. "Thank you for your hospitality, Miss Montgomery," Isaac replied, unable to entirely mask the confusion her presence stirred in him. "Your family is very kind to a stranger." "Perhaps you've been a stranger long enough," she suggested, and then with a gentle smile she was gone, leaving Isaac alone with thoughts more turbulent than the storm raging outside. As he settled onto the surprisingly comfortable sofa, surrounded by Dr. Montgomery's medical texts and journals, Isaac tried to recapture his certainty about departing as soon as the weather cleared. The logical arguments remained sound. Wyoming offered work, Silverton held nothing for a cowhand, attachment was a luxury he couldn't afford, yet they felt hollow now, mere habit rather than conviction. The wind howled around the eaves and snow pattered against the window, but the sounds failed to evoke their usual restlessness in Isaac's chest. Instead, in the warm heart of the Montgomery home, they seemed transformed from threats to reminders of contrast, the bitter cold outside making the shelter within all the more precious. A dangerous thought for a man determined to remain untethered. But as sleep finally claimed him, Isaac's last conscious awareness was not of escape routes or tomorrow's journey, but of Olivia's words echoing in his mind. "Perhaps you've been a stranger long enough." Morning arrived with blinding brightness, as sunlight reflected off nearly 2 feet of fresh snow. Isaac woke to the sound of Thomas's excited voice in the kitchen, exhorting his father and sister to hurry their breakfast so they could properly assess the winter transformation of Silverton. For a moment, disoriented by unfamiliar surroundings, Isaac experienced the traveler's brief panic of displacement. Then memory returned, the dinner, the storm, the Montgomery's insistence that he remain overnight. He sat up, running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair, and found his clothes, brushed clean and neatly folded, resting on a nearby chair. By the time he'd dressed and made himself presentable, the household was fully awake. Dr. Montgomery sat at the kitchen table reviewing patient notes, while Mrs. Wilkins presided over a stove laden with breakfast preparations. Thomas stood at the window, his breath fogging the glass as he catalogued the snow's depth in various locations. "Good morning, Mr. O'Malley," the doctor greeted him. I trust you slept well despite Thomas's enthusiastic commentary on bison until quite late in the evening. Very well, thank you, Isaac replied, slightly embarrassed by the family's easy inclusion of him in their morning routine. The snow is substantial. First major storm of the season always is, Mrs. Wilkins commented, sliding a plate of eggs and bacon before him. Sit and eat before it gets cold. Coffee's fresh. Isaac obeyed, oddly comfortable despite the unfamiliar domesticity of the scene. Thomas abandoned his window surveillance to pepper Isaac with questions about ranch life between bites of breakfast, while Dr. Montgomery interjected occasional comments that revealed surprising knowledge about cattle operations. "Where is Miss Montgomery this morning?" Isaac asked during a brief lull in Thomas's interrogation, immediately regretting the question when he caught Mrs. Wilkins' knowing glance. "Olivia rises early," Dr. Montgomery explained. "She's already been out to check on neighbors and assess conditions. The storm has created difficulties for some of the older residents, and my daughter has appointed herself unofficial welfare coordinator for Silverton's vulnerable citizens." There was unmistakable pride in the doctor's voice, and Isaac felt a surge of admiration for Olivia's practical compassion. The image of her trudging through deep snow to check on strangers seemed entirely in character with what he'd observed of her nature. "The mines will be closed today," Thomas informed Isaac eagerly. "Father says that means there will be impromptu gatherings all over town, card games and storytelling, and maybe even music if Mr. Fletcher brings his fiddle to the hotel." "First heavy snow is always a holiday of sorts, Dr. Montgomery confirmed. "A chance for the community to come together before winter settles in properly. You're fortunate to experience it, Mr. O'Malley, even if it delays your journey." Before Isaac could respond, the back door opened, admitting a flurry of snowflakes and Olivia Montgomery, her cheeks flushed from cold and exertion. She wore a practical wool coat, boots, and a knitted scarf wrapped multiple times around her neck. Snow dusted her hair like diamond powder, melting slowly in the kitchen's warmth. "Good morning," she greeted them, unwinding her scarf. "The Wilsons' roof is holding so far. Mr. Peterson has already cleared paths to all his neighbors' doors, and Mrs. Fletcher is organizing an impromptu gathering at the hotel for midday, soup and bread for anyone who wants to attend." Her gaze found Isaac, and her smile brightened. "You're awake. I hope Thomas allowed you at least some sleep." "Plenty," Isaac assured her, suddenly very conscious of his borrowed surroundings and improvised presence in their home. "Though I should return to the boarding house soon, I've imposed long enough." "Nonsense," Olivia replied, accepting a cup of coffee from Mrs. Wilkins. "You're practically snowed in, as is half the town. Mrs. Hollister won't be expecting you until paths are cleared, which won't be until afternoon at the earliest. Besides," Thomas added earnestly, "you promised more cattle drive stories." Isaac found himself smiling at the boy's persistence. "So I did." After breakfast, Thomas, Dr. Montgomery interjected firmly, "Mr. O'Malley deserves to eat in peace." The meal continued with comfortable conversation, centered primarily on the storm's effects and community responses. Isaac listened, struck by how naturally the Montgomerys incorporated the town's welfare into their personal concerns. It wasn't performative charity or distant noblesse oblige, but genuine integration of community needs with family life. After breakfast, true to his word, Isaac spent an hour regaling Thomas with carefully edited tales of cattle drives and ranch life. The boy proved an attentive audience, asking thoughtful questions that revealed a quick mind behind his youthful enthusiasm. Dr. Montgomery was called away to treat a minor injury, someone who had slipped on newly fallen snow, leaving Isaac and Thomas to their conversation in the parlor, while Olivia assisted Mrs. Wilkins with household tasks. "Will you really leave as soon as the snow clears?" Thomas asked abruptly during a pause in Isaac's description of night herding. "Don't you get tired of always traveling?" The direct question, so similar to Olivia's more tactful inquiry the previous evening, caught Isaac off guard. "It's the nature of the work," he explained. "Cattle drives end, seasonal ranch work concludes, moving on is part of the life." Thomas considered this with a slight frown. "But don't you want a home, somewhere that's yours, where people know your name and care if you don't come back?" The simple wisdom of the question struck deep. Before Isaac could formulate a response that wouldn't crush the boy's evident hope without being dishonest, Olivia appeared in the doorway. "Thomas, Mrs. Wilkins needs help bringing in more firewood, and I believe you promised to shovel a path to Mr. Peterson's gate." The boy sighed but rose obediently. Yes, Livy. He turned to Isaac, his expression earnest. Will you still be here when I get back? I expect so, Isaac replied, surprised to find he meant it. The snow won't be cleared enough for travel today. Satisfied, Thomas hurried off to his assigned tasks, leaving Isaac alone with Olivia. She entered the parlor fully, taking a seat across from him. She'd changed from her outdoor clothes into a simple blue dress that complemented her fair coloring, her honey gold hair neatly arranged though still slightly damp from the melted snow. I apologize if Thomas is being intrusive, she said. He tends to form attachments quickly and ask questions adults typically avoid. He's a fine boy, Isaac assured her. Reminds me of myself at that age before, he trailed off, unwilling to elaborate on the hardships that had transformed a curious child into a guarded man. Before the West taught you that caring is dangerous, Olivia suggested gently. Isaac met her gaze, finding no judgment there, only understanding. Something like that. I understand the instinct to protect oneself, she said after a moment. After Mother died, I wanted to build walls too, to keep Father and Thomas at a safe distance, so I'd never feel that kind of pain again. What changed your mind? I realized the walls didn't actually prevent pain, they just ensured I would face it alone. Her expression softened with memory. And I saw how much Thomas needed connection, not just protection. Children teach us remarkable lessons about resilience if we pay attention. Isaac considered her words, finding them uncomfortably perceptive. The boy asked if I ever wanted a home, he said finally. Somewhere people would miss me if I didn't return. A profound question, Olivia observed. What was your answer? He didn't wait for one. And if he had? Isaac hesitated, caught between honesty and self-protection. I'm not sure what I would have said. Perhaps that's progress in itself, Olivia suggested, a small smile playing at her lips. Uncertainty leaves room for possibility. Before Isaac could respond, the front door opened, admitting Dr. Montgomery along with a blast of cold air. The paths are clearing, he announced, stamping snow from his boots, though I've advised everyone to remain close to home for the day. The temperature is still falling. He looked between Olivia and Isaac, seeming to register the intensity of their conversation. Am I interrupting? Not at all, Father, Olivia replied smoothly. I was just telling Mr. O'Malley about Mrs. Fletcher's gathering at the hotel. I thought perhaps we might all attend, since you've declared a snow holiday. Excellent idea, Dr. Montgomery agreed. Community is never more important than in the aftermath of a storm. You'll join us, won't you, Mr. O'Malley? Isaac found himself without a reasonable excuse to decline. If you're certain I wouldn't be intruding. Quite the contrary, the doctor assured him. Fresh perspectives are always welcome at these gatherings, and I believe Mrs. Fletcher mentioned music, a fine opportunity to observe Silverton at its most convivial. And so it was decided. Isaac would accompany the Montgomerys to the hotel gathering, extending his impromptu stay in Silverton by yet another social engagement. The rational part of his mind warned that each additional hour spent in their company made eventual departure more difficult. The connections forming tenuous but real were precisely what he'd spent years avoiding. Yet as he helped Thomas clear the last of the path to the gate, listening to the boy's excited speculation about what treats Mrs. Fletcher might serve, Isaac found it increasingly difficult to summon his customary eagerness to move on. The snow-blanketed town, with smoke rising from chimneys and neighbors calling greetings as they cleared their own paths, possessed an unexpected charm, a sense of shared purpose that contrasted sharply with the isolation of the trail. By early afternoon, most of the walkways had been cleared enough for safe passage, and townspeople began making their way toward the hotel. The Montgomerys set out together, Thomas running ahead to capture pristine snowdrifts with his boots, Dr. Montgomery and Olivia walking at a more dignified pace with Isaac alongside. Silverton has surprised me, Isaac admitted as they approached the hotel, where warm light already spilled from the windows and the sounds of conversation drifted out. There seems to be genuine community here, not just the usual frontier collection of strangers. The isolation of mountain towns often creates stronger bonds, Dr. Montgomery observed. When help can be days away in winter, neighbors become essential to survival, not merely social conveniences. Father has a theory, Olivia added, that communities are healthiest when interdependence is recognized and valued rather than denied. The Western myth of the self-sufficient individual makes for good stories but poor settlements. A controversial perspective in a land that celebrates the solitary pioneer, Isaac noted. Perhaps, Dr. Montgomery acknowledged, but observably true nonetheless. The homesteaders who survive are those who form cooperative arrangements with neighbors, sharing equipment, assisting with harvests, supporting one another through illness and hardship. Rugged individualism is a luxury few can actually afford on the frontier. The observation struck uncomfortably close to Isaac's own experience. His parents' homestead might have survived if they'd settled near others willing to share resources and labor during the drought. Their isolation, their pride in self-sufficiency, had proven fatal when conditions deteriorated. Before he could pursue this unsettling thought, they entered the hotel's main parlor, which had been transformed into an impromptu community hall. Tables laden with soups, breads, and pies lined one wall. Children darted between groups of adults engaged in animated conversation. In one corner, a man tuned a fiddle while another unpacked a concertina. Dr. Montgomery, Miss Olivia, Mrs. Fletcher, a robust woman with iron-gray hair and formidable energy, approached them immediately. And young Thomas, so glad you could come. And who might this be? Her gaze fixed on Isaac with undisguised interest. Isaac O'Malley, Dr. Montgomery introduced. A traveler temporarily delayed by our hospitality in the snow. Mr. O'Malley, Mrs. Fletcher, whose organizational skills keep Silverton functioning in all seasons. Pleased to meet you, ma'am, Isaac said, tipping his hat. A handsome young man with proper manners, Mrs. Fletcher observed approvingly. A rarity in these parts. Are you considering settling in Silverton, Mr. O'Malley? I'm just passing through, Isaac replied automatically, though the words felt increasingly hollow. Heading north when the trail's clear. Pity, Mrs. Fletcher said frankly, we need more young men of good character. The mining companies attract a certain element. She trailed off, her meaning clear without elaboration. Well, enjoy our hospitality while you're here. The music will start shortly and there's plenty of food. As Mrs. Fletcher moved away to greet other arrivals, Olivia leaned closer to Isaac. You'll notice that's the second time today you've been told Silverton needs more men like you. The universe may be trying to tell you something, Mr. O'Malley. Her teasing tone carried no pressure, only gentle observation, but Isaac found himself uncharacteristically flustered. The universe has a poor track record of clear communication in my experience, Miss Montgomery. Perhaps you haven't been listening closely enough, she suggested, her eyes twinkling with mischief. Or perhaps you've been moving too quickly to hear. Before he could formulate a suitable response, Thomas returned, his face flushed with excitement. Mr. Fletcher says he's going to play the song about the cattle drive. I told him you're a real cowboy and could tell if he gets the details wrong. Olivia laughed at her brother's enthusiasm. Thomas, I'm sure Mr. Fletcher doesn't need his musical accuracy verified by Mr. O'Malley. On the contrary, called the fiddler from his corner, evidently overhearing. I welcome an expert's assessment. Most of my knowledge comes from sensational novels and travelers' tales. Come over, young man, and set me straight before I perpetuate any more frontier falsehoods. Thus invited, Isaac found himself drawn into conversation with the musicians, answering questions about trail life and cattle drives with more detail than he'd offered anyone in years. The gathering around him grew as others became interested in the exchange, and soon Isaac was the center of an impromptu storytelling session, recounting experiences from his years on the range. From across the room, he occasionally caught glimpses of Olivia, helping Mrs. Fletcher arrange food, conversing with elderly residents, guiding Thomas away from overindulgence in sweets. Each time their eyes met, she offered a small smile of encouragement, as if pleased to see him engaging with the community rather than maintaining his customary distance. When the music finally began in earnest, Isaac found a quiet corner, content to observe the festivities. Dr. Montgomery joined him, offering a cup of Mrs. Fletcher's famous cider. You've made quite an impression, the doctor commented. Silverton doesn't often have the opportunity to hear firsthand accounts from someone who's experienced so much of the territory. I haven't done anything remarkable, Isaac demurred. Just followed the work where it led. And observed keenly along the way, it seems. Dr. Montgomery studied him with thoughtful eyes. You've a sharp mind, Mr. O'Malley. Have you ever considered applying it to something more permanent than seasonal ranch work? The question caught Isaac off guard, such as, Silverton is growing, the mines are expanding, the railroad will reach us within the year. There will be opportunities for men who understand cattle, shipping operations, supply management. The town council was discussing the need just last week. Isaac frowned, uncertain how to respond to what sounded suspiciously like a job offer. I'm just a cowhand, Dr. Montgomery, not a businessman. You sell yourself short, the doctor replied mildly. I've observed how you listen, how you assess situations. Those are valuable skills in any context. He paused, then added more carefully, and I've noticed how you look at my daughter. Heat rose in Isaac's face. Sir, I assure you. No assurance is necessary, doctor. Montgomery interrupted gently. Olivia is quite capable of managing her own affairs and determining who merits her attention. I mention it only because I've also observed how she looks at you, and it would be remiss of me as a father not to consider the implications. Isaac stared at the doctor, momentarily speechless. The idea that Olivia might regard him with particular interest seemed simultaneously improbable and exhilarating. I'm leaving when the trail's clear, he said finally, the words sounding unconvincing even to his own ears. So you've said repeatedly, Dr. Montgomery noted with a slight smile, yet here you remain, increasingly integrated into our community gatherings. He gestured toward the room where Thomas was now showing Olivia a clumsy version of a dance step. Some journeys end where we least expect them to, Mr. O'Malley. The wise traveler remains open to such possibilities. With that cryptic observation, the doctor excused himself to join a group of elderly residents, leaving Isaac to contemplate his words. Across the room, Olivia laughed as her brother attempted to twirl her, the sound carrying clearly despite the music and conversation. Something shifted in Isaac's chest, a loosening of the protective shell he'd built around his emotions since leaving his parents' failed homestead. The sensation was foreign, almost frightening in its intensity, yet undeniably compelling. As if sensing his attention, Olivia looked up, meeting his gaze across the crowded room. Her smile, genuine, warm, without artifice or expectation, seemed to Isaac like an invitation to reconsider everything he'd assumed about his place in the world. The fiddle music swelled, people began clearing space for dancing, and Isaac remained in his corner, caught between the familiar impulse to maintain his distance and the unexpected, powerful desire to cross the room and ask Olivia Montgomery for a dance. The choice, he realized with startling clarity, was whether to remain the traveler he'd been for 3 years, untethered, unattached, safe, but ultimately alone, or to risk becoming something else entirely. Something like a man with a place to belong. The hotel gathering continued well into the afternoon, transitioning seamlessly from communal meal to impromptu dance as the fiddle and concertina set a lively pace. Isaac observed from the periphery, nursing his cider while declining several invitations to join the dancing with polite excuses about his limited skills. The truth, which he acknowledged only to himself, was more complicated. Dancing required a kind of surrender, to music, to partnership, to joy, that felt dangerously vulnerable to a man who'd spent years protecting himself from attachment. You look terribly serious for a celebration, Mr. O'Malley. Isaac turned to find Olivia beside him, her cheeks flushed from dancing, a few strands of honey-gold hair escaping their pins. She'd removed her shawl in the warmth of the room, revealing the simple elegance of her blue dress and the gentle curves of her figure. Just observing, he replied, oddly self-conscious under her direct gaze. A perpetual observer, never a participant, there was gentle challenge in her tone. That seems a lonely approach to life. It served me well enough. Has it? Her head tilted slightly as she studied him. From where I stand, it appears to have served primarily to keep you isolated while offering the illusion of security. Isaac frowned, uncomfortable with her perception. You make many assumptions about a man you've known only 2 days, Miss Montgomery. Perhaps, she acknowledged without apology. Or perhaps some people reveal their essential character quickly to those paying proper attention. She nodded toward the dance floor where Thomas was attempting to follow the steps of a Virginia reel with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Thomas has already decided you belong in Silverton. He has remarkable instincts about people. Children often build fantasies around strangers, Isaac said, more harshly than he intended. They also see through pretenses adults maintain, Olivia countered, unperturbed by his tone. Thomas perceives the man you could be, not merely the wanderer you've convinced yourself you must remain. Before Isaac could formulate a response to this uncomfortably astute observation, the music changed to a simpler waltz. Olivia's expression softened into something like invitation. "Dance with me, mister." "O'Malley," she said, the words falling between request and gentle command. "One dance won't compromise your carefully maintained detachment." Refusal would be both ungracious, and Isaac realized with surprise, contrary to his actual desires. He set aside his cider cup and offered his hand. "I'm not particularly skilled." "Fortunate then that I am," Olivia replied with a small smile, placing her hand in his. "I'll guide you where necessary." As they joined the other couples circling the cleared space, Isaac felt unexpectedly self-conscious. It had been years since he danced, and never with a woman who affected him as powerfully as Olivia Montgomery. Placing his hand at her waist, he was acutely aware of the solid warmth of her beneath the fabric of her dress, not the fragile delicacy celebrated in popular songs, but something more substantial and, to his mind, infinitely more appealing. The music began, and Isaac focused on the basic waltz step, determined not to embarrass either of them with clumsy missteps. To his surprise, they moved together with unexpected harmony, Olivia following his lead while subtly guiding him away from collisions with other couples. "You dance better than you admitted," she observed after a few turns around the floor. "And you're more forgiving of my mistakes than I deserve," he replied, relaxing slightly as they found their rhythm together. "Not forgiveness, partnership," Olivia corrected. "Good dancing, like most worthwhile endeavors, requires mutual accommodation and shared purpose rather than perfection from either participant." The insight struck Isaac as applicable far beyond the dance floor. "A philosophy for life as well as waltzing, Miss Montgomery." Indeed, her eyes met his with unexpected directness as they turned. "The Western myth of solitary achievement has always seemed fundamentally flawed to me. No one thrives entirely alone, not even the most determined cowboy." The gentle challenge in her words penetrated Isaac's carefully maintained defenses. Here was a woman who saw through his practiced self-sufficiency to the loneliness beneath, and rather than pitying him for it, she was offering an alternative perspective. As they continued to circle the floor, Isaac became increasingly aware of subtle details. The way Olivia's hand rested trustingly in his, the faint scent of lavender that clung to her hair, the graceful confidence with which she moved. Unlike many women of his acquaintance, she occupied space without apology, her solid figure moving with a natural dignity that made conventional standards of feminine delicacy seem arbitrary and inadequate. The music drew to a close and couples around them began to separate. Isaac found himself reluctant to release Olivia's hand, to surrender this brief connection. "Thank you for the dance, mister." "O'Malley," she said, her brown eyes warm with something that might have been understanding. "Perhaps not all forms of temporary partnership need be avoided." Before he could respond, they were interrupted by Thomas, who bounded up with characteristic enthusiasm. "Livy, Mr. O'Malley, Mrs. Fletcher says there's to be storytelling next, and she wants Mr. O'Malley to share more about cattle drives. Everyone is most interested." Olivia smiled at her brother's excitement. "If Mr. O'Malley is willing," she said, looking to Isaac for confirmation. The prospect of being the center of attention again was not entirely comfortable, but Isaac found himself unwilling to disappoint either Thomas or his sister. "I'm hardly a professional storyteller," he demurred. "All the better," Olivia assured him. "Authenticity matters more than polish for stories of the frontier." And so Isaac found himself seated before an attentive audience, recounting tales of stampedes and river crossings, of starlit nights on the open range and the camaraderie of cowboys around campfires. The stories flowed more easily than he expected, memories long suppressed emerging with surprising clarity and even occasional humor. Throughout his narration, he was aware of Olivia watching from nearby, her expression reflecting genuine interest rather than the polite attention often accorded to travelers' tales. When he described the beauty of dawn breaking over the prairie, her eyes seemed to see the scene alongside him. When he recounted the harrowing moments of a night stampede, her face mirrored his remembered tension. It was as if, through his words, they were sharing experiences that had shaped him, a kind of intimacy Isaac hadn't anticipated or sought, yet found himself embracing nonetheless. The afternoon stretched into early evening, as stories gave way to more music, simple refreshments, and the easy conversation of neighbors brought together by shared circumstances. Isaac moved through these social interactions with increasing comfort, no longer feeling like an outsider observing from a safe distance, but as a welcome, if temporary, addition to the community. Doctor. Montgomery had been called away to attend a patient, leaving Olivia to escort Thomas home as dusk approached. Isaac naturally fell into step beside them as they left the hotel, the boy chattering excitedly about the day's events while his sister listened with affectionate patience. The snow-covered streets gleamed in the fading light, transformed from familiar thoroughfares to magical passages between buildings now softened by winter's artistry. The temperature had dropped further, turning breath to visible puffs in the cold air. "Will you join us for dinner again, Mr. O'Malley?" Thomas asked as they approached the doctor's quarters. "Mrs. Wilkins mentioned stew, and she makes the best dumplings in Colorado." Isaac hesitated, aware that accepting would further complicate his eventual departure. "I shouldn't impose a second night." "Nonsense," Olivia interjected firmly. "The boarding house will be overcrowded with minors unable to return to their lodgings, and Mrs. Wilkins always prepares enough for extra guests. Besides, Father would be disappointed to miss hearing about your reception at the gathering." Presented with such practical reasoning, Isaac found he had no compelling counterargument, nor, he admitted to himself, any genuine desire to refuse. "Then I accept with gratitude." Thomas's face brightened. "Excellent, and perhaps after dinner you could tell me more about the cattle towns. I'm particularly interested in Dodge City. Is it truly as wild as the newspapers describe?" "Thomas," Olivia chided gently, "perhaps Mr. O'Malley would appreciate a respite from storytelling after entertaining the entire town this afternoon." "It's no trouble," Isaac assured her, finding the boy's curiosity refreshing rather than burdensome. "Though I should warn you, Thomas, newspaper accounts tend toward exaggeration. The actual Dodge City has its share of trouble, but isn't nearly as dramatic as reporters suggest." "I suspected as much," Thomas replied with surprising seriousness. "Father says newspapers often sacrifice accuracy for sensation, particularly regarding the West." They reached the doctor's quarters to find Mrs. Wilkins already preparing the promised stew, its savory aroma filling the small home with the promise of comfort against the deepening cold outside. Isaac was directed to help Thomas bring in more firewood while Olivia assisted with dinner preparations, and he found himself slipping into the domestic routine with unexpected ease. By the time Dr. Montgomery returned from his patient visit, the small dining table was set, the stew was bubbling fragrantly, and the house had taken on the warm, inviting atmosphere that Isaac was beginning to associate specifically with the Montgomery home. "Ah, Mr. O'Malley," the doctor greeted him, hanging his snow-dusted coat by the door. "I'm pleased you've joined us again. I understand you were quite the success at the gathering. Mrs. Peterson stopped me specifically to comment on your storytelling abilities." "People were very kind," Isaac replied, somewhat embarrassed by the attention. "I simply shared experiences most have had in some form." But with unusual eloquence, according to reports. The doctor washed his hands at the kitchen basin before joining them at the table. "Olivia Thomas was our guest as impressive as the townsfolk suggest." "More so," Olivia confirmed, her eyes meeting Isaac's briefly. "Mr. O'Malley has a gift for making the listener feel present in his experiences. Quite remarkable for someone who claims no particular skill with words." "I was most interested in the stampede story," Thomas added enthusiastically, "especially how Mr. O'Malley's horse knew exactly what to do even before he gave commands. The partnership between man and animal is fascinating." "Indeed it is," Dr. Montgomery agreed, accepting a bowl of stew from Mrs. Wilkins. "All successful frontier endeavors ultimately depend on such partnerships, between people and animals, between neighbors, between communities and the land itself." The conversation flowed easily from there, touching on topics ranging from Thomas's education to the development of Silverton's infrastructure to Dr. Montgomery's hopes for establishing proper medical facilities as the town grew. Throughout the meal, Isaac found himself not merely participating but actively engaged, offering observations and even occasional suggestions based on arrangements he'd seen in other developing communities. "You have a surprisingly broad perspective for a man who claims to be just a cowhand," Dr. Montgomery noted during a discussion of Silverton's need for improved water management. "Your suggestions regarding shared maintenance responsibilities are quite insightful." Isaac shrugged, uncomfortable with the implied compliment, just practical experience. I've seen what works and what doesn't in various settlements. Precisely my point, the doctor said. You've observed and analyzed, not merely passed through. That's a valuable perspective for a growing community like Silverton. After dinner, while Olivia and Mrs. Wilkins cleared the table, Thomas persuaded Isaac to examine a map of Colorado territory he'd been studying, eager to trace the routes of cattle drives and identify towns he'd heard mentioned in Isaac's stories. Dr. Montgomery observed their interaction with evident approval before excusing himself to review patient notes in his study. As the evening progressed, Isaac became increasingly aware of the domestic tableau he'd been invited into, a family engaged in their evening routines, making space for his presence as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Thomas eventually retired to his room with a book on Western exploration. Mrs. Wilkins completed her kitchen duties and departed for her own quarters above the carriage house, and Isaac found himself alone with Olivia in the small parlor. "You've been very patient with Thomas," she observed, settling into a chair near the fireplace with her embroidery hoop. "His curiosity can be exhausting." "Not at all," Isaac replied honestly. "His enthusiasm is refreshing. Most boys his age try to appear worldly beyond their years. Father has encouraged his natural inquisitiveness rather than rushing him toward premature adulthood." Olivia's needle moved steadily through the fabric stretched on her hoop. "The West often demands children grow up too quickly. We've tried to preserve some measure of proper childhood for Thomas despite our circumstances." "You've succeeded admirably," Isaac said, watching the firelight play across her features as she concentrated on her work. "He's remarkably well-adjusted for a boy who lost his mother so young. We've been fortunate in many ways despite our losses." Olivia glanced up, meeting his gaze directly. "And you, Mr. O'Malley, what preserved your capacity for kindness despite the hardships you've endured?" The question caught Isaac off guard. "I'm not sure I've preserved anything worth mentioning." "I disagree," Olivia replied quietly. "I've observed how you listen to Thomas with genuine interest rather than feigned patience. How you engage with townspeople not from obligation but authentic curiosity. How you stepped forward without hesitation when you perceived I might need assistance." Her hands stilled on her embroidery. "These are not the actions of a man whose humanity has been eroded by hardship." Isaac shifted uncomfortably under her assessment. "Perhaps you're determined to see the best in a passing stranger. Perhaps you're determined to believe the worst about yourself." Her tone remained gentle despite the challenge in her words. "Why is that, I wonder? What purpose does such a belief serve?" The question penetrated deeper than Isaac expected, touching on truths he'd scarcely acknowledged to himself. "Expectations kept low are rarely disappointed," he said finally. "The West doesn't reward optimism, doesn't it?" Olivia's expression was thoughtful. "It seems to me the West demands hope, not the fragile kind that shatters at the first setback, but the enduring sort that persists through drought and blizzard, through crop failure and illness." She gestured toward the window where snow continued to fall softly in the darkness. "Every person who remains here after the first hard winter exercises a form of hope, including you, Mr. O'Malley." "I don't remain anywhere," Isaac reminded her. "That's rather the point." "Yet you've remained in Silverton these past days with surprising ease," she observed, "and I suspect it's not merely the snow that has kept you from pressing onward." The insight was too accurate for comfort. Isaac rose from his chair, moving toward the fireplace to mask his discomfort. "You're very direct, Miss Montgomery." "Life is too short for unnecessary circumlocution," she replied simply, "particularly on the frontier where next season is never guaranteed. A philosophy not universally appreciated in polite society, I imagine." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged with a small smile. "But I've found it serves me better than the elaborate social dances many women perform to avoid speaking their minds clearly." She set aside her embroidery, regarding him steadily. "Does my directness trouble you, Mr. O'Malley?" "Not trouble exactly," Isaac admitted, finding her honesty both disarming and compelling. "It's simply unexpected. As is finding oneself snowed in with a family of comparative strangers, yet here we are." Her expression softened. "The West specializes in unexpected circumstances, wouldn't you agree? Perhaps the measure of a person is not how they avoid such circumstances, but how they respond when conventional paths are blocked." Once again, Olivia's insight struck uncomfortably close to truths Isaac had avoided confronting. His entire approach to life since his parents' deaths had been predicated on avoiding precisely the kind of connections that the Montgomery family seemed to form so naturally, the very connections that made loss devastating. Yet in their home, surrounded by the evidence of their resilience despite their own profound losses, Isaac's carefully constructed justifications for emotional isolation began to seem less like wisdom and more like fear masquerading as pragmatism. Before he could respond to Olivia's observation, the door to the doctor's study opened and Dr. Montgomery emerged looking tired but satisfied. "Patient notes finally organized," he announced. "Mr. O'Malley, I presume you'll be staying the night again. The temperature has dropped considerably, and Mrs. Hollister's boarding house is reportedly quite full with stranded miners." The assumption of his continued presence, offered without question or apparent imposition, struck Isaac as both surprising and strangely warming. "If you're certain it's no trouble." "None whatsoever," the doctor assured him. "The sofa in my study served you well last night, did it not? And Mrs. Wilkins has already prepared fresh linens in anticipation of your stay." "Thank you," Isaac said, genuinely moved by their unquestioning hospitality. "Your family has been extraordinarily kind to a stranger." "Hardly a stranger any longer," Dr. Montgomery corrected with a gentle smile, "more a visitor becoming acquainted." He glanced between Isaac and Olivia with an expression that suggested he observed more than he commented upon. "Well, I believe I'll retire. The day's patients have left me rather fatigued. Olivia, don't keep our guest talking too late. I imagine he's had quite enough social engagement for one day." After bidding them both good night, the doctor retreated to his bedroom, leaving Isaac once again alone with Olivia in the firelit parlor. "Father likes you," she said simply once they heard the doctor's door close. "He's not usually so quick to welcome people into our home." "He's a good man," Isaac replied. "You're fortunate to have him." "I am," Olivia agreed. "Though his approval isn't the reason I've enjoyed your company these past days." She rose from her chair, gathering her embroidery supplies. "Nor is it why I hope you might reconsider your determination to leave as soon as the snow clears." The statement, offered without artifice or coquettish indirection, caught Isaac completely off guard. "Miss Montgomery." "You needn't respond now," she interrupted gently. "Or at all, if you prefer. I simply wanted you to know that your presence has been significant. To all of us, but perhaps especially to me." She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at him with a directness that made his heart beat faster. "Think about it, Mr. O'Malley. Consider whether Wyoming holds anything that compares to what you might find in Silverton." With that, she bid him good night and left the parlor, the soft rustle of her skirts fading as she moved down the hallway to her room. Isaac remained by the fireplace, Olivia's words echoing in his mind. The transparent honesty of her statement, free from manipulation or excessive sentiment, yet undeniably personal, affected him more profoundly than any feminine strategy he'd encountered before. As he prepared the study sofa for another night in the Montgomery home, Isaac found himself contemplating possibilities he'd firmly rejected for years. The idea of remaining in one place. Of forming connections that might withstand the West's harshness rather than avoiding them entirely. Of building something meaningful rather than merely surviving in perpetual motion. The snow continued to fall outside, blanketing Silverton in winter's temporary stillness. But within Isaac's mind, long-dormant considerations were stirring to life, disrupting the familiar patterns of self-protection that had governed his existence since leaving his parents' failed homestead. Wyoming still waited to the north. The familiar pattern of seasonal employment, temporary shelter, and emotional distance remained available. But for the first time in years, Isaac found himself genuinely questioning whether that pattern served any purpose beyond the illusion of safety, and whether that illusion was worth the profound solitude it guaranteed. As he drifted toward sleep, surrounded by the quiet security of the Montgomery home, the prospect of departure no longer felt like freedom. It felt like loss. Morning arrived with startling brightness, sunlight streaming through the study window as Isaac woke on the sofa. The storm had finally passed, leaving Silverton transformed beneath a brilliant blue sky and pristine snow that sparkled like diamond dust in the early light. For a moment he simply lay there, listening to the quiet sounds of the Montgomery household coming awake. Mrs. Wilkins in the kitchen, Thomas's eager voice asking about breakfast, Dr. Montgomery's measured responses. The domestic tableau struck him with unexpected poignancy, a glimpse of the kind of life he'd convinced himself was not meant for men like him, men the West had taught to expect loss rather than continuity. The events of the previous evening returned to him, particularly Olivia's parting words. Consider whether Wyoming holds anything that compares to what you might find in Silverton. The question had haunted his dreams, weaving through his sleep like a persistent melody. Wyoming offered what it always had: temporary work, anonymous shelter, the freedom of detachment. But freedom from what exactly? From connection, from the possibility of loss that accompanied any meaningful relationship. Isaac rose and dressed, folding the borrowed bedding with military precision before making his way to the kitchen where the family had gathered for breakfast. Thomas greeted him with characteristic enthusiasm, immediately launching into predictions about sledding possibilities given the fresh snowfall. Dr. Montgomery offered a cup of coffee and a quiet good morning, while Mrs. Wilkins placed a plate of eggs and bacon before him without comment, as if he were a regular fixture at their table rather than a temporary guest. It was Olivia's greeting that affected him most profoundly. A simple good morning, accompanied by a smile that conveyed neither expectation nor pressure, yet contained a warmth that seemed directed specifically toward him. She wore a simple green dress that morning, her honey gold hair arranged practically for the day's activities, yet Isaac found her more appealing than any fashionable Eastern beauty he'd encountered in his travels. "The roads should be clear by tomorrow," Dr. Montgomery observed as they ate. "At least clear enough for cautious travel. The stage will likely resume its schedule by midday." The comment hung in the air, an unspoken question about Isaac's plans now that the weather no longer prevented departure. Thomas's face fell visibly, while Olivia continued eating, her expression carefully neutral despite the heightened color in her cheeks. "I suppose they will," Isaac replied, uncomfortably aware of the attention his response garnered. "Though I've heard the north route can remain treacherous for several days after a heavy snow." "Indeed," the doctor agreed, his tone neutral though his eyes reflected understanding of Isaac's unspoken uncertainty. "No sense risking difficult conditions unnecessarily. Silverton offers comfortable accommodation while you wait for more favorable travel weather." The conversation shifted to other topics: Thomas's schoolwork, a new medical text the doctor had ordered, preparations for the formal town social on Saturday. Isaac participated, contributing where appropriate, yet remained acutely conscious of the underlying question his presence represented. After breakfast, he found himself at loose ends. The Montgomerys had their daily routines: Dr. Montgomery seeing patients, Thomas attending the recently reopened school, Olivia assisting with her father's medical practice while managing household affairs. Isaac offered to help Mrs. Wilkins clear snow from the walkways, an offer she accepted with pragmatic appreciation. As he worked in the crisp morning air, shovel biting through crusted snow, Isaac considered his situation with growing clarity. The practical reasons for departure remained valid. Wyoming offered employment suited to his experience. Silverton had limited need for his particular skills. His few possessions waited at the boarding house, ready for travel as always. Yet for the first time in years, the prospect of continuing his solitary journey brought no sense of relief or anticipation, only a hollow awareness of what he would be leaving behind. Not just the Montgomery family's warmth and acceptance, though that weighed heavily, but also the glimpse of a different possible future they had inadvertently revealed. A future where connection might prove stronger than loss. Where roots might withstand the West's harsh seasons rather than being inevitably torn away. By mid-morning, the town was fully awake, paths cleared between buildings, commerce resuming with the resilience typical of frontier communities. Isaac returned his borrowed shovel to Mrs. Wilkins, then made his way toward the boarding house, ostensibly to check on his belongings and settle his account. Mrs. Hollister greeted him with her usual brisk efficiency. "Wondered when you'd appear. Your room's been kept, though we've been full to bursting with stranded miners. That'll be another $1 for the 2 nights, including meals whether you took them or not." Isaac paid without comment, then climbed the narrow stairs to the small room where his saddlebags and rifle remained. Everything was exactly as he'd left it, ready for immediate departure, as had been his practice for years. The familiar sight of his travel-worn possessions should have evoked the usual sense of liberation, the freedom of a man unencumbered by place or permanent connection. Instead, Isaac found himself struck by the starkness of his belongings, the utilitarian nature of a life reduced to what could be carried on horseback. No book save a small Bible that had been his mother's. No mementos except a worn photograph of his parents on their wedding day. No evidence of connection to any place or person beyond the necessities of survival. It was, he realized with sudden clarity, a life defined by absence rather than presence, by what he had rejected rather than what he had embraced. The realization was still troubling him when he left the boarding house and made his way toward the livery to check on his mare. The streets were busy now, townspeople taking advantage of the clear weather to replenish supplies and conduct business delayed by the storm. Isaac nodded to several who greeted him by name, a novel experience that emphasized how quickly he'd transitioned from anonymous traveler to recognized visitor in the small community. At the livery, Simmons was adjusting a horseshoe with methodical precision. He glanced up as Isaac entered. "O'Malley, come to check on your mare? She's doing fine, that hoof is much improved with rest and poultice." "Good to hear," Isaac replied, moving to the stall where his chestnut mare greeted him with a soft nickering. "She's served me well, wouldn't want to push her before she's ready." "Planning to head out tomorrow?" Simmons asked, returning to his work. "Roads north should be passable by then, though not pleasant." "Stage driver says there's drifting in the passes." "Haven't decided yet," Isaac found himself saying, the admission surprising him as much as it evidently surprised Simmons, who paused in his hammering. "Thought you were eager to reach Wyoming before the season advanced," the livery owner commented, his tone carefully neutral. "That was the plan," Isaac agreed, stroking his mare's neck absently. "But plans can change." Simmons resumed his work without further comment, though a knowing expression crossed his weathered features. After checking his horse thoroughly and ensuring she had fresh hay and water, Isaac continued his aimless walk through town, eventually finding himself near the small building that housed the doctor's practice. Through the window, he could see Olivia at a desk, her head bent over what appeared to be account books, a pencil moving efficiently across the page as she calculated figures. The sight affected him with unexpected power. This capable young woman managing the practical aspects of her father's healing work, her solid presence and anchor in a community still establishing its permanence against the frontier's uncertainties. As if sensing his attention, Olivia glanced up, her expression shifting from concentration to surprised pleasure when she recognized him through the glass. She rose and came to the door, opening it with a smile that warmed Isaac more effectively than any fire could have. "Mr. O'Malley," she greeted him, "I didn't expect to see you until dinner. Father mentioned you planned to check on your horse and belongings." "Already done," he replied, suddenly conscious of having no practical reason for his presence outside her father's office. "I was just walking, thought I'd see the town properly now that the weather's cleared." "A fine idea," Olivia agreed, her eyes reflecting understanding of his unstated uncertainties. "Silverton is quite charming when freshly blanketed in snow. Have you visited the new church yet? The stained glass windows were imported from Denver at considerable expense and are really quite beautiful." The invitation in her words was clear, yet free from pressure. "I haven't," Isaac admitted. "Would you? That is, if you're not too busy with your father's accounts." "They can wait," Olivia said decisively, reaching for her coat and hat which hung near the door. "Father isn't expecting any patients until afternoon, and I could use some fresh air after a morning of calculations." And so Isaac found himself walking beside Olivia Montgomery through the snow-covered streets of Silverton, listening as she pointed out buildings of interest and shared anecdotes about the town's development. She moved with the confidence of someone who had already claimed this place as home despite her relatively recent arrival, who saw not just what Silverton was, but what it might become. "The town council has approved funds for a proper schoolhouse by next year," she was saying as they approached the small white church with its modest steeple. "Currently the children share space with the assay office, which is less than ideal for concentration, as you can imagine. The mines must be producing well if the town can afford such improvements," Isaac observed. "Well enough," Olivia agreed, though father argues that infrastructure should precede prosperity, not follow it. Communities that invest in shared resources during lean times build the foundation for abundance, he always says. "Your father is an unusual man," Isaac noted, holding the church door for her. "Most frontier doctors I've encountered are more concerned with extracting maximum payment than building community. Father believes true healing extends beyond the individual body to the community itself," Olivia replied as they entered the simple sanctuary. A perspective that occasionally frustrates those who would prefer to see medicine as merely a commercial transaction. Inside, the church was plain but dignified, wooden pews, a modest altar, and as Olivia had mentioned, surprisingly beautiful stained glass windows that cast jewel-toned light across the snow-white interior. The effect was both serene and uplifting, a pocket of color and artistry amid the frontier's utilitarian aesthetic. "Quite something, aren't they?" Olivia said softly, observing Isaac's appreciation of the windows. "The Methodist Women's Auxiliary raised funds for 3 years to commission them. Father says they're a perfect example of frontier determination, creating beauty where mere function might have sufficed." "Your father seems to have a philosophical observation for every occasion," Isaac commented, though without mockery. "A family trait, I'm afraid," Olivia replied with a self-deprecating smile. "Mother always said Montgomery minds are incapable of observing without analyzing. A tendency that can be tiresome in casual conversation, I'm sure." "Not tiresome," Isaac assured her, "thought-provoking." They moved through the small church in companionable silence, admiring the craftsmanship evident in even the simplest elements. Finally, they settled in a pew where the colored light from the windows created a particularly striking pattern. "Have you made your decision?" Olivia asked after a moment, her directness catching Isaac off guard despite his growing familiarity with her forthright nature. "About leaving," he hedged, though he knew precisely what she meant. "About staying," she corrected gently. "About considering Silverton as more than a temporary shelter from a storm." Isaac looked away from her searching gaze, focusing instead on the play of light across the simple altar. "I'm not sure what Silverton could offer a man with my limited skills. The mines have no need for cowboys." "A frontier town needs all manner of abilities," Olivia replied. "The livery could use additional help with the increasing number of travelers' horses. The stage company is expanding its operations with the growing mining traffic. The cattle operations that supply the town require experienced handlers." She paused, then added more softly, "and some reasons for staying transcend practical employment." The implication hung between them, neither fully expressed nor easily dismissed. Isaac turned to find Olivia watching him with an openness that both unnerved and compelled him. No coyness or manipulation, just honest acknowledgement of the connection that had formed between them with surprising swiftness. "Miss Montgomery, Olivia," he began, her given name feeling both foreign and right on his lips. "I'm not the kind of man who makes decisions lightly, especially about matters of settlement. Nor am I the kind of woman who expresses interest without serious consideration," she replied steadily. "I've had ample opportunity to observe men who pass through frontier towns, Mr. O'Malley. Most reveal their essential character quickly, particularly in how they respond to those they consider beneath their notice or unworthy of their attention." "And how have I revealed my character?" Isaac asked, genuinely curious about her assessment. "Through kindness offered without expectation of return, through respect shown to everyone from Thomas to Mrs. Hollister to the miners at the gathering, through willingness to reconsider long-held beliefs when presented with new evidence." She smiled slightly. "And through the careful way you hide your intelligence behind the modest title of just a cowhand, as if admitting to thoughtfulness might somehow diminish your frontier credentials." The accuracy of her perception was startling, and somewhat alarming in its implications about how transparent his character had been to her observant eyes. "You see more than I intended to reveal. Or perhaps exactly what needed revealing, despite your intentions." Olivia's expression remained gentle but unflinching. "The question remains, Mr. O'Malley. Having been seen so clearly, do you intend to flee or remain? Because I should tell you," her voice took on a hint of humor despite the seriousness of the moment, "Thomas has already informed half the town that you're considering staying, and Mrs. Fletcher is determined to introduce you to her unmarried niece at the social on Saturday." The unexpected shift to humor broke the tension, and Isaac found himself laughing softly. "Your brother is remarkably confident in his powers of persuasion." "With good reason," Olivia replied, her own smile widening. "He usually gets his way through sheer persistence, a trait he shares with Mrs. Fletcher, I'm afraid. A formidable alliance against a mere traveler." "Quite so, you might as well surrender with dignity." Their laughter echoed briefly in the empty church, a sound that seemed perfectly appropriate despite the sanctified setting, as if joy itself were a form of reverence in this place designed to shelter hope against the frontier's harshness. When their mirth subsided, Isaac found himself regarding Olivia with new clarity. Here was a woman of substance in every sense, intelligent, capable, direct in her communications, comfortable in her own being. Her solid physical presence matched the steadiness of her character, offering a kind of beauty that transcended the narrow definitions celebrated in popular songs and sentimental literature. "I can't promise anything," he said finally, the words emerging with surprising honesty. "3 years of wandering isn't easily set aside, but I can stay through the social on Saturday at least. See what opportunities Silverton might hold." Olivia's expression brightened, though she maintained her composure. "A sensible approach," she agreed. "Commitments should never be made hastily, especially on the frontier where circumstances change rapidly." She rose from the pew, adjusting her coat. "And now, I should return to Father's accounts before he wonders if I've abandoned my responsibilities entirely." As they walked back toward the doctor's office, their conversation turned to more practical matters. The upcoming social, Thomas's education, the town council's plans for spring improvements. Yet beneath the ordinary exchange lay the awareness of a threshold crossed, a possibility acknowledged between them that neither could entirely dismiss. At the doctor's office, Olivia paused before entering. "Will you join us for dinner again this evening, Mr. O'Malley? Mrs. Wilkins mentioned chicken and dumplings, and Thomas would be devastated if you departed without proper farewells, regardless of your ultimate decision." "I would be honored," Isaac replied, the formal phrase feeling inadequate for the complexity of his emotions. "And please, after all this time, you might call me Isaac." "Isaac," Olivia repeated, his name sounding different in her voice, not merely a label but an acknowledgement of the man behind it. "Until this evening, then." As she disappeared into the office, Isaac continued his walk through Silverton, seeing the town with new eyes, not as a temporary shelter from a storm, but as a community with potential for growth, for connection, for a future that might include him in ways he'd never allowed himself to consider. Wyoming still waited to the north. The familiar path remained open. But for the first time since leaving his parents' failed homestead, Isaac O'Malley found himself contemplating a different journey entirely, one that led not away from attachment but toward it. The days that followed settled into an unexpected rhythm. Isaac moved his few possessions from Mrs. Hollister's boarding house to a modest room above the livery stable, an arrangement suggested by Simmons, who mentioned needing help with the increasing number of travelers' horses as the roads cleared and business resumed. "Nothing permanent," Simmons had emphasized, perhaps recognizing Isaac's wariness of commitment. "Just until you decide your next move, room and meals in exchange for morning and evening help with the stock." The arrangement suited Isaac perfectly, offering useful occupation and modest accommodation without demanding long-term promises. It also provided a convenient explanation for his extended stay in Silverton, one that required no elaborate justifications or acknowledgments of deeper motivations. Each day brought new discoveries about the small mountain community. Isaac found himself drawn into its rhythms, morning coffee at the hotel restaurant where miners and merchants discussed the day's prospects, afternoons helping Simmons with various tasks around the livery, evenings frequently spent in the Montgomery home, where his presence had somehow transitioned from novelty to expected feature. Dr. Montgomery treated Isaac's uncertain status with tactful understanding, neither pressing for commitments nor discouraging his growing integration into their family circle. Thomas, less restrained by adult subtlety, openly campaigned for Isaac's permanent residence in Silverton, presenting detailed arguments about the town's need for men with his particular skills and experience. It was Olivia, however, whose approach affected Isaac most profoundly. She offered neither pressure nor indifference, but rather a steady presence that acknowledged the significance of his choices without demanding specific outcomes. Their conversations deepened, ranging from books they had read to experiences that had shaped their perspectives, from frontier challenges to hopes for the territory's future. In her company, Isaac found himself sharing thoughts he'd scarcely acknowledged even to himself, doubts about the path he'd chosen after his parents' deaths, questions about what constituted a life well lived on the frontier, even cautious considerations of what meaningful connection might look like in a land that took as often as it gave. By the time Saturday arrived, bringing with it the long-anticipated social, Isaac had established a place for himself in Silverton that felt neither entirely temporary nor fully permanent, a liminal state that both unnerved and intrigued him. He had agreed to accompany the Montgomerys to the event, a decision that Thomas celebrated as further evidence of his imminent permanent residency, and that Olivia accepted with pleased composure. The social was held in the town hall, a relatively new building that served multiple functions in the growing community. When Isaac arrived to escort the Montgomerys, he found Thomas already in his Sunday best, practically vibrating with excitement, while Dr. Montgomery secured his watch chain with the deliberate movements of a man accustomed to formal occasions. It was Olivia's appearance, however, that caught and held Isaac's attention. She wore a dress of deep burgundy that complemented her fair complexion and honey-gold hair, which had been arranged more elaborately than he'd seen before, with small pearl combs catching the lamplight. The gown was modestly cut but well tailored to her figure, emphasizing the graceful curves that Isaac had come to appreciate rather than the artificial narrowness celebrated in fashion plates. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she greeted him, the words emerging without calculation or artifice. A becoming flush colored Olivia's cheeks. "Thank you," she replied with equal directness. "You're quite handsome yourself this evening." Isaac had indeed made an effort with his appearance, visiting the barber for a proper shave and haircut, and wearing his best shirt with a vest he'd purchased at Patterson's store. An expenditure that represented a small but significant concession to the possibility of remaining in Silverton beyond the immediate future. The town hall had been transformed for the occasion with lanterns, bunting, and tables laden with refreshments contributed by various community members. A small group of musicians, including Mr. Fletcher with his fiddle, had set up in one corner, tuning their instruments as townspeople arrived in their finest attire. "Quite the gathering," Isaac observed as they entered. "More elaborate than I expected." "Silverton takes its socializing seriously," Olivia explained, accepting his arm with natural ease, "particularly as winter approaches. These gatherings sustain community spirit through the isolated months ahead." Dr. Montgomery was immediately drawn into conversation with several prominent citizens, while Thomas darted off to join a group of boys his age who were eyeing the refreshment table with poorly concealed interest. Isaac and Olivia made their way through the growing crowd, stopping frequently as townspeople greeted them, many addressing Isaac by name and expressing pleasure at his continued presence in Silverton. "You've made quite an impression," Olivia noted after several such exchanges, "for someone merely passing through." "So it seems," Isaac agreed, increasingly aware of how easily he had slipped into the community's rhythms. "Though I'm not entirely sure how it happened." "Communities recognize what they need," Olivia suggested, "and Silverton needs more people who contribute substance rather than merely extract value." Before Isaac could respond to this perspective, they were intercepted by Mrs. Fletcher, accompanied by a young woman with an eager expression. "Mr. O'Malley, Miss Montgomery," Mrs. Fletcher greeted them effusively. "How wonderful you could attend. May I present my niece, Miss Clara Thornton, recently arrived from Kansas City." "Clara, this is Mr. Isaac O'Malley and Miss Olivia Montgomery." Miss Thornton, a slender young woman with precisely arranged dark curls and a fashionably narrow waist, offered a practiced smile. "How do you do? Aunt Martha has told me so much about Silverton's newest residents." "Miss Thornton," Isaac acknowledged with a polite bow, "Miss Montgomery's family has been here several months. I'm merely a visitor enjoying the town's hospitality." "Such modesty," Mrs. Fletcher exclaimed. "Mr. O'Malley has become quite essential at the livery already, and his stories at our gathering after the snowstorm were most illuminating. Clara is particularly interested in Western experiences, aren't you, dear?" "Indeed," Miss Thornton confirmed, her gaze fixed on Isaac with clear interest. "I find frontier life fascinating, though Kansas City hardly qualifies as truly Western by Colorado standards." "Clara will be staying through the winter, Mrs. Fletcher added significantly. "Perhaps, Mr. O'Malley, you might save a dance for her this evening. She's an accomplished dancer studied in St. Louis." The matchmaking was so transparent that Isaac might have found it amusing under different circumstances. As it was, he felt Olivia's hand tighten slightly on his arm, not possessively, but with a barely perceptible tension that suggested she was not indifferent to Mrs. Fletcher's obvious intentions. "I would be honored," Isaac replied with careful courtesy, "though I should warn you, Miss Thornton, that my dancing skills are rudimentary at best." "I'm an excellent teacher," Miss Thornton assured him with a coquettish smile. "Perhaps the third set." With arrangements made and social obligations satisfied, Mrs. Fletcher guided her niece onward to make further introductions, leaving Isaac and Olivia momentarily alone amid the swirling crowd. Mrs. Fletcher wastes no time, Olivia observed, her tone deliberately light despite the hint of color in her cheeks. So it seems, Isaac agreed, turning slightly to face her more directly. Though her efforts may be misplaced in this instance. Olivia's eyes met his, a question in their warm brown depths. Because you don't intend to remain in Silverton long enough to pursue acquaintances. Because, Isaac said carefully, the words feeling significant as they formed, my interest lies elsewhere. The simple declaration hung between them, neither elaborate nor poetic, yet carrying a weight that both acknowledged without needing further clarification. Olivia's expression softened, a small smile curving her lips as understanding passed between them. I see, she said simply. Then perhaps you should secure your dances with your preferred partner before Mrs. Fletcher's niece recruits you for additional sets. An excellent suggestion, Isaac agreed, feeling unusually light despite the seriousness of the moment. Miss Montgomery, would you honor me with the first dance, and perhaps the second, fourth, and any others you might be willing to spare? Olivia's smile widened, illuminating her face with a joy that struck Isaac as far more beautiful than any conventional prettiness. I would be delighted, Mr. O'Malley, though people will certainly talk if we monopolize each other's company so thoroughly. Let them, Isaac replied, surprising himself with the decisiveness of his response. I've spent 3 years avoiding meaningful connection. I find I'm no longer concerned with what others might think of my choices. The musicians began the opening notes of the first dance just then, saving Olivia from having to formulate an immediate response to this unexpectedly definitive statement. As couples moved to take their places, Isaac offered his hand, which Olivia accepted with a composure belied only by the slight trembling of her fingers against his palm. The dance was a simple waltz, allowing conversation despite the movement. Isaac found himself moving with more confidence than during their impromptu dance after the snowstorm, guided partly by Olivia's subtle leadership and partly by his own growing comfort in her company. You've been practicing, she observed as they turned gracefully around the floor. Mentally, perhaps, Isaac admitted. I've had ample time to consider my previous mistakes. A metaphor for more than dancing, Olivia suggested perceptively. Perhaps, he acknowledged, guiding her through a turn with growing assurance. I've been considering many things these past days. Such as? Isaac hesitated, organizing thoughts that had been forming gradually since the snowstorm had first delayed his departure. Such as whether safety achieved through isolation is worth the cost, whether movement without purpose is merely evasion rather than freedom, whether the West's harshness demands withdrawal or deeper connection to withstand its challenges. Olivia's eyes widened slightly at the philosophical nature of his response. Substantial considerations for a man who claims to be just a cowhand. A persistent misconception I may have deliberately encouraged, Isaac conceded with a small smile. It's easier to remain detached when others expect little beyond physical capability. Yet you've revealed more complex dimensions to those paying attention, Olivia noted, her expression thoughtful as they continued their measured movements through the dance. Was that intentional or accidental? With you neither, I think, Isaac replied honestly. More like, inevitable, you see more clearly than most. Only where my interest is particularly engaged, Olivia admitted, a hint of color touching her cheeks at the acknowledgement. The dance drew to a close, but Isaac maintained his light hold on Olivia's hand as couples around them dispersed or rearranged for the next set. And your interest is engaged in my case. I believe I've made that reasonably clear, she replied with characteristic directness, though her voice held a note of vulnerability beneath the composure. Though perhaps not as clear as you deserve, given your own honesty. Before Isaac could respond, they were interrupted by Thomas, who appeared beside them with flushed cheeks and bright eyes. Isaac, the punch is excellent, and Mrs. Peterson's apple tarts are even better than Mrs. Wilkins, though please don't tell her I said so. Are you enjoying the dancing? Father says you and Livy move well together, which he says is a promising observation, though I'm not entirely sure what he means by that. The stream of commentary brought smiles to both their faces, diffusing the intensity of the moment with Thomas's innocent enthusiasm. The dancing is very enjoyable, Isaac assured the boy. Though I believe your sister deserves all credit for any grace in our movements. Livy dances beautifully, Thomas agreed loyally. Mother taught her before she died, and father says she has natural poise regardless of what some of the miners' wives might whisper about her figure being too substantial for true elegance. Which I think is terribly unfair since Livy is the most beautiful girl in Silverton, and much nicer than Elizabeth Parker, who is considered very pretty, but pulled my hair during school last week. The artless revelation of unkind gossip created a brief, awkward silence. Olivia's expression remained composed, though a flash of hurt crossed her features before she controlled it. Isaac felt a surge of protective anger on her behalf, coupled with renewed appreciation for her dignity in the face of such petty cruelty. "Your sister," Isaac said firmly, ensuring his voice carried to those nearby, "possesses a grace that transcends fashionable standards. True elegance comes from character and confidence, not arbitrary physical proportions." Olivia's eyes widened at this public defense, while Thomas nodded vigorously. "That's exactly what father says. He says beauty that depends on corsets and starvation is a poor substitute for natural health and vigor, and that historically, cultures recognize the appeal of women with substantial." "Thomas," Olivia interjected gently, though her eyes shone with suppressed amusement and gratitude, "perhaps we might continue this anthropological discussion at a more appropriate time. I believe the musicians are preparing for the next dance." As Thomas darted off to rejoin his friends, Isaac turned back to Olivia, offering his arm as the music began again. "I apologize if my comment was presumptuous." "Not at all," she assured him, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve as they moved to join the forming sets. "It was unexpectedly affirming. I've grown accustomed to dismissing such whispers, but hearing them repeated even innocently." She hesitated. "It affects one more than one wishes to admit. The whispers reflect poorly only on those who speak them," Isaac said with quiet conviction. "Your beauty is evident to anyone with eyes unclouded by narrow convention." The simple, honest compliment brought a deeper color to Olivia's cheeks and a softness to her expression that stirred something profound in Isaac's chest. A protective tenderness coupled with admiration for her resilience in the face of such casual cruelty. The evening continued with dancing interspersed with conversations and refreshments. Isaac fulfilled his promised dance with Miss Thornton, finding her technically proficient but lacking the natural harmony he'd experienced with Olivia. The young woman's practiced flirtation and carefully rehearsed observations about Western life struck him as hollow compared to Olivia's genuine insights and straightforward communication. As the social progressed, Isaac found himself increasingly certain about feelings that had been forming since the snowstorm. With each conversation shared, each dance completed, each moment of connection with Olivia and her family, the prospect of departing for Wyoming seemed less like continuation of a necessary pattern and more like deliberate rejection of something precious and rare. The realization crystallized fully during a quiet moment late in the evening. The dancing had paused while the musicians refreshed themselves, and Isaac stood with Olivia near an open window where the cool night air provided relief from the warmth of the crowded hall. "You seem pensive," Olivia observed, her perceptiveness as acute as ever. "I'm making a decision," Isaac replied honestly, "about leaving." She asked, echoing her question from days earlier, though now with greater significance between them. "About staying," he corrected, turning to face her fully. "About whether the security of detachment is worth the cost of never building anything that lasts. About whether the risk of attachment might actually be less devastating than the certainty of continued isolation." Olivia's eyes searched his, hope and caution mingled in her expression. "And what conclusion are you reaching?" "That I've been a coward," Isaac said simply, calling self-protection wisdom when it was really fear, mistaking movement for freedom when it was actually evasion. Refusing to acknowledge that loss is possible in any circumstance, but guaranteed when you never allow yourself to build anything worth losing. The musicians resumed playing, a slower waltz that invited closer conversation. Isaac offered his hand, which Olivia accepted without hesitation, and they moved onto the floor together, their steps naturally synchronizing as they had from their first dance. "When my parents died," Isaac continued quietly as they moved through the figures of the dance, "I convinced myself that attachment itself was the problem. That if I avoided putting down roots, forming connections, caring too deeply about any place or person, I could avoid the pain of inevitable loss." "A natural response to grief," Olivia observed gently. "Though perhaps not sustainable indefinitely." "No," Isaac agreed, "because I've discovered something unexpected in Silverton, something I wasn't looking for and certainly wasn't prepared to find." "And what is that?" Olivia asked, her voice barely audible above the music. Isaac's eyes held her steadily as they turned through the waltz. "That some connections are worth the risk, that some people make you want to build something that might withstand the West's harshness rather than simply surviving it in isolation." The simple declaration hung between them, neither flowery nor elaborate, yet conveying with perfect clarity the transformation occurring in Isaac's understanding of his place in the world, and his hopes for Olivia's place within it. "The West takes what you love eventually," she acknowledged, echoing his earlier belief. "But perhaps what matters is not whether loss comes, but who stands beside you when it does. Perhaps shared grief is more survivable than solitary safety." "I'm beginning to believe so," Isaac replied, his hand tightening slightly on hers as they completed another turn. "And I find myself wanting to test that theory here in Silverton, with you and your family if you're amenable." Olivia's expression softened, joy illuminating her features more brilliantly than any conventional beauty could have achieved. "I believe we might be amenable to such an arrangement," she said, the formal words belied by the emotion in her voice. "Though father would likely insist on a proper courtship period before any definitive commitments." "I would expect nothing less," Isaac assured her, his own heart lighter than it had been in years. "I have no intention of rushing what I hope might be a lasting arrangement." As the dance concluded, they remained briefly in their closed position, the moment stretching between them with new significance and shared understanding. Around them, couples separated and moved toward refreshments or conversation, but Isaac found himself reluctant to break the connection that now felt both fragile in its newness and profound in its implications. "Livy." "Isaac," Thomas's voice broke the moment as he approached, excitement evident in his flushed face. "Father says we should prepare to depart soon as it's growing late, but first he wants to speak with Isaac about something important." "He's waiting by the punch bowl." Olivia's eyes widened slightly. "Did he say what about?" "Only that it was a matter requiring private discussion," Thomas replied with the air of someone repeating words exactly as delivered. "And that I should not, under any circumstances, attempt to eavesdrop, which I wouldn't do anyway because eavesdropping is ungentlemanly conduct." The boy's earnest assurance brought smiles to both their faces despite the momentary concern about Dr. Montgomery's intentions. "I should speak with your father," Isaac said, offering Olivia his arm to escort her toward the refreshment table. "I imagine he has questions about my intentions now that I've decided to remain in Silverton."